Thank you for listening to the BJJBrick Podcast. We'll be bringing you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and good times. We hope to flatten your Jiu-Jitsu learning curve, help you get the most out of your grappling ability, and meet your goals both on and off the mat.
Welcome back, my friends, to the BJJBrick Podcast. This is episode 278. My name is Byron. I'm here with my buddy Joe. Joe, we're one clown short of our full clown car. Gary is out this week. He's got some family things he's handling. This is a busy time of year for everybody. This week we have a great episode. Paul Kindzia joins us on the podcast for the interview. He just wrote the book Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life, How to Create an Extraordinary Life Through Jiu-Jitsu. Joe, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. It feels like we're not missing a clown. We're missing the clown. So, yeah, I feel like we're going to have to work to try and insert some corny jokes here or there to make up for Gary's absence.
I think you're off to a good start there by just pointing out the reality of what Gary plays, what role he plays. So we'll try to make up for it there. This will be one of the more sexier shows with Gary deleted from it. Is what I told him over our text messaging, and a little less sweaty. This will be the least sweaty show we've done all year. No, we do appreciate our friend, and he's doing great. He's just got a lot going on with family, so we're going to go ahead and get this episode out to you guys like we usually do on a Monday. And to do that, we have to record this today.
Yep, we'll call this the BJJ Light episode, just like the regular BJJ Brick, but with 33% less flavor.
Oh, and less filling.
Yeah.
If you don't quite get enough BJJ Brick this week, I don't know why that would be, and getting this wouldn't really supplement what you're missing. You can get the audiobook, Your First Year in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's a book that I made. It's about 2.5 hours long, and I really want to walk you through your first year of jiu-jitsu. My first year of jiu-jitsu was quite a while ago, but I remember some of the struggles I had so vividly as far as some of the social things, some of the frustrations I was feeling, and some of the reasons I started jiu-jitsu are definitely not the reasons I continue to do jiu-jitsu today. But I think if I had a book like this, I think jiu-jitsu would have been a much smoother start for me. And that's my goal. I want to get you to that first year and have success on the mat, not just with how you're performing, but how you feel about it and what you're learning and the techniques and the correct things you're learning. And I don't really think this audiobook does that. So check it out. If you're in your first year of training or just about ready to start training, this would be the perfect book for you just in time for Christmas. There'll be a link to it in the show notes. And when you get the book, it's $11.99, and the money goes and supports the podcast. So thank you guys so much that have got it and all the positive feedback we've gotten.
Yep, awesome. And that's usually Gary's segment. You did awesome with that, Byron. So good job, man. The next segment's always our off the mat lesson. And so I was thinking about this last week, something off the mat that relates to on the mat. And some of y'all might know that I dabble with guitar playing, and so some of you guys will know, some of our listeners will know this and some won't, but usually in a rock band, the guitar player, he's got his guitar plugged in, and then it goes into a pedal board or an effects processor. They both do the same thing, and then it goes to the amp. And on a pedal board, a minimalist guitarist might have 3 pedals, 4 pedals. You know, he'll have a distortion pedal, maybe a reverb, maybe a delay, and some sort of modulation. And some guys will have 7 or 8 pedals, and that's what helps them get different tones and different sounds that you're hearing when they're playing. And there's sort of 2 different types of guitarists. There's one guy that'll get a guitar, and he'll get a simple setup, a good quality guitar, a couple of good pedals, a good amplifier, and then he'll just get down to the business of learning how to play guitar. And there's other guys that are constantly buying and selling pedals, swapping out amps, you know, and after a few years, they know a lot about guitar gear. They can play some licks and a few riffs and get some really good tones, but they can't necessarily play whole songs. They can't join a band and play sets because they've been too worried about getting just the perfect tone or learning the fanciest techniques. And I think I see the same thing sometimes with guys in jiu-jitsu. Some guys come in and they just want to learn the whole game, and they listen to the instructor, and other guys are kind of chase techniques and collect techniques, and they'll play spider guard for a while, and then they'll get bored with that, and they'll start playing full close guard, and then they'll get bored with that for a while, and then they're just going to take guys down and play top game. And I just think there's some real value in not chasing techniques and just systematically learning the game of jiu-jitsu.
Joe, those are some great points. And there are really two different types of classes people go to when they're starting jiu-jitsu. I think the majority of beginners are thrown into a jiu-jitsu class where there's brand new white belts and there's black belts on the mat, and there's a technique portion where a simpler technique might be shown, and then we're kind of brought up to a more advanced thing, or like it's trying to teach a class of kids and a class of college students, all the same classroom setting, and that can be very hard. And so in that setting, the students that are new really need to try to figure out what's going on and what do I need to glean from this lesson, and get some help and guidance from their coaches. And the other class is the beginner class. If you are able to take a beginner class, do that, because that's going to give you that focus that Joe's talking about. They'll show you the variety of things they think are important to start your game, get you that good foundation, and get you off and running. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. Like if you're new and you really want to work guard game for a while, I don't think that's wrong. But eventually you have to learn how to pass guard and learn how to maintain a top control and these sort of things. But I see so much benefit to having beginner classes if a school can maintain those numbers to make it worth their time. It's definitely worth the student's time.
Yeah, absolutely. I've known some coaches that will have a beginner's class, and they'll just have it if there's just one student in there, and they feel pretty strongly about that. So that's a great point, Byron.
Man, hey, thanks for noticing how great my point was. That just made my day about how smart you're saying I am. Who's that remind you of, Joe?
That's the best thing I've heard.
If you're new to this show, we typically have a third person on here, and if you compliment him in any way, man, he does call attention to that. That's my Gary impression.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah. This week we do have a quote like usual. The quote's from Bobby Knight. And Joe posted this on our Facebook page a few weeks ago. The key is not the will to win. Everybody has that. It is the will to prepare to win that is important. And I think that's important because that brings in the desire during training sessions to do well, and the desire during training sessions to grow. Sure, when it counts and you're on the mat and if you're competing and you're out there doing your thing, you want to win. You want to do really well. That's why you're nervous. That's why you're excited. But did you have a strong will to train hard? Did you have a strong desire to put in the extra miles and extra hours on the mats in the month coming up to this? That's where it's really won and lost beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of goes hand in hand with something else I've heard a few times. Everybody wants to be a champion until they find out what it takes to be a champion. And that's really where it's at, is learning to embrace the process and embrace the grind, and just get after it every day or 3 days a week or whatever works for you. But be consistent and be willing to prepare.
So that's our quote of the week. The interview this week is by Paul Kindzia. He just wrote that book, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's not an affiliate link or anything like that. Just go, if it sounds interesting to you, go get it. If you're a jiu-jitsu person who likes, a lot of it reminds me of the off-the-mat lessons. Like, I think it's great that jiu-jitsu could teach us so many lessons because we're really interested in jiu-jitsu. And if you could learn something on the mat, it makes a lot more sense to at least a guy like me when I could think of it as like what's happening in my life. This happened in jiu-jitsu, and then I could translate it to my off-the-mat life. Because you're talking my language. It's not only something I'm really interested in, it's something I've done for a while, and I've practiced a lot. And so that's what this book is a lot to me. It's kind of like life advice through mat lessons, and it's a great learning tool. And speaking about the quote of the week, I've highlighted lots of pages and quotes in this book, and I plan, over as time goes, to occasionally slip in one of these quotes in the quote of the week. And if you get the book, I'll tell you what page it's on, and we'll discuss the quote, and we'll kind of enjoy this together. So that's the plan. But now it's time to kick off the interview with my friend Paul Kindzia.
He is the most interesting grappler in the world.
He has never gotten a paper cut. He blocks it on a microscopic level. Rather than telling an opponent how poor their BJJ skills are, he simply buys them a BJJ audiobook to help them out. He once put a chokehold on a honey badger and got a pint of honey. It was a sweet move.
I don't always listen to podcasts, but when I do, I prefer the BJJBrick Podcast. Stay sweaty, my friends.
All right, my friends, I'm happy to bring Paul Kindzia to the BJJBrick Podcast. Paul has recently come out with this book, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life, How to Create an Extraordinary Life Through Jiu-Jitsu. And I just got done reading it about a week ago, and I'm happy to get Paul on the show. I'm excited to talk with him about a lot of different topics that he has in there and learn from him some more. Highly recommend the book, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Paul, welcome to the BJJBrick Podcast.
Thank you so much, Byron. It's a pleasure.
Paul, if they haven't read the book and they don't have any information on you, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little backstory, and all the way up to doing jiu-jitsu and writing books.
Sure, and you could jump in at any time.
Okay.
You can go down any rabbit hole. But my name is Paul Kindzia. I'm actually born and raised in Niagara Falls, New York, on the Canadian border. I was one of 6 children. So my father was a union construction worker. My mother stayed home and took care of the kids. Great-grandmother lived with us for a stretch. The 9 of us shared one bathroom. Now, the thing I remember most about growing up was, and I think a lot of listeners can relate to this, I was physically a very small kid growing up. So I graduated from high school weighing 110 pounds, was only about 5'6" tall, and just a little tiny runt. So at that point, you could imagine, growing up when you're the little guy on the school bus, 2 things are going to happen. You're either going to learn how to make people laugh, or you're going to get bullied and get some beatdowns. And I actually learned both. I learned how to make people laugh, but I also took my licks and got my share of bullying and got my share of beatdowns. And that was the catalyst for me always having, like in the back of my mind, this attraction to jiu-jitsu or martial arts. It was just more martial arts, right? Because we all think in terms of, I want to stand up to the guy who's picking on me or things like that. So, that's my childhood in a summary. I grew up not having anything to do with martial arts. I didn't grow up really even knowing as a kid. I didn't know what jiu-jitsu was. I didn't take karate. I didn't take taekwondo or judo. I didn't wrestle. I actually loved to fish. I grew up on the lower Niagara River. So my parents actually ran a bait and tackle store to supplement the income for the family, which then led to more problems for me because I'd get on the school bus and kids would yell "worms" as I walked down the aisle. So I was one of those kids, typical, hated school, was a terrible student. My escape from reality was just heading to the river to fish alone as much as possible. So I just wanted to escape from school, tired of getting bullied, picked on through the years, and that sort of thing. So those things all led to my eventual discovery of martial arts, and then of course jiu-jitsu in particular, which I'm very thankful that it took a while, but I'm glad I found it. So that's my childhood. As I went to college, I became an accountant, finance guy. So I'm not coming for listeners. I'm not some world champion black belt who's been doing jiu-jitsu since 6 years old. I am a CPA, certified financial planner, wealth manager, CEO of a wealth management firm. I am a corporate guy who had to fit in athletics with work and life and all the other stuff. So a lot of normal jiu-jitsu practitioners can relate to that. What is it like to do jiu-jitsu when you have things going on, work and travel and families and responsibilities and houses and, that sort of thing. So that was something that I think a lot of practitioners get stressed over this dichotomy and paradox where we fall in love with something like jiu-jitsu, but then sometimes we all anchor to these points of, well, I want to be a world champion, or I want to be great, or I want to have these dreams and aspirations, but that all has to be balanced within the context of life, right? And some people discover jiu-jitsu early enough where maybe they started jiu-jitsu at 12 years old, or they were at a Gracie Academy, in the kids program, and they just got into it so young, and those stars all aligned for them to become an adult black belt world champion, right? So I think you could relate to that too, because you weren't in that case either, right? Byron, right?
Yeah,
that wasn't
right.
your story.
I did not start when I was a child, and I'm not particularly athletically gifted. But yeah, I mean, I can relate to a lot of that. I was kind of a littler guy in school. Didn't really get into fights, but definitely felt like I was picked on and nervous at times from other kids. And one thing or after another, I ended up finding jiu-jitsu shortly after, or towards the end of college, and been happy to be on the mats ever since.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that we all need to keep in context. It really, sure, it's great to think about what could have been. It's great to imagine. It reminds me, it's a two-way street, right? It's always great to think, what if I would have started earlier? But then in some cases, do we really want to be that person that peaked in our fun endeavors in high school? Like, were we the high school football team captain, or were we the college athlete that peaked in college or at 22 years old? And the answer is, like, that has its downsides. And there's some downsides of peaking so early in life. And then you wonder for the rest of your life, like, how do I replicate that fame or that attention or being the golden child? And then a lot of the listeners might not relate. Remember that show Married with Children with Ed O'Neill, who's really a black belt in jiu-jitsu, right? But he played the character Al Bundy, and he used to sit on the couch, and they used to call me Touchdown Bundy, because in high school he was the big show, right? And now he's a shoe salesman or whatever, because he peaked in high school. So I really try to imagine, both scenarios. It's cool to think, like, what if? But then at the same time, it's like, count our blessings. We found jiu-jitsu when we did, whenever that was. And there's still even people that are over 50 years old that will discover jiu-jitsu, or older. And that's great, because they can get a lot out of jiu-jitsu, and the experience and the health benefits and the relationships and all the goodness of the martial arts. They just happen to discover it later in life. And I think that's still wonderful. So I really try to remind people of the positives. It doesn't matter when you start. It just matters that you're lucky enough to have found it. So that's a good it's a good perspective to have, I think.
You hear people say that, what if I started when I was a child? I'd be so much better. Or really, what if I started when I was 30 versus when I'm 40? Well, what if you started 10 years from now?
Yeah.
Like, if you haven't started yet, you could start now, and in 10 years you could think, well, I'm glad I started 10 years ago, because I didn't want to wait for even longer than I had already waited. So
and I think there's another component to it as well, from a physiological component, because we know this from studying other sports. Other sports know that if you have a competitive nature to you and try to compete at an elite level, at a very high level, you really only have about a 20-year shelf life of kind of like start to finish before physiologically you lost your edge. So we see this in runners, where they might have started running at 14 years old, and then they were on the high school cross-country team, and then they were on the college team, and then they ran professionally afterwards and tried to make the Olympic team or a pro runner. But eventually they peak and they can't sustain that peak human physiological performance forever. So whether, and that's why we also see people that hammer as kids in high school and college, and then maybe chasing an Olympic dream. They were a swimmer or they were some sport like cycling, but then physiologically they really do peak, and they peaked early, but they only had a 20-year window. And that's why if we even study sports like marathoning, which we could talk about because I came from a very extensive endurance sports background, we know that physiologically athletes have this 20-year window from a competitive nature. So when they look at the world records for marathoning or triathlons, and they say, oh, this guy has the record for the fastest marathon at 55, that's not someone who started running when they were 14. They probably started running in their early 40s, early to mid 40s. And they came into their peak 10, 15 years of base training and building up and learning, but they were hitting their marathon age peak at 55. So that's interesting from a physiological, and that's why when we do look at world records in some of these other sports, you would think that it was this cumulative effect. Like if you did start at 14, you would eventually break the world record, but that turns out not to be true. And that's fascinating to me because I love learning and I love studying all these weird things and learning how the machines work, right? So I like taking things apart, and that's even kind of led to this book. And how do humans reach peak performance, or how do we learn things faster? That's kind of all in my wheelhouse of my personality. So I kind of enjoy looking at these things from different perspectives, and that's where, hey, look at it. I even believe like now jiu-jitsu is getting so big and so popular. You can start jiu-jitsu in your 40s and still, if you want, you can compete. You can get into Masters 5 jiu-jitsu as a white belt or as a blue belt or as a purple belt and compete. That doesn't mean you're going to get massive brackets, but I also have news for you. You know, if you do compete, you actually don't want massive brackets as a Masters 4 athlete because it really is a heavy toll on your body, right? So it kind of works itself out, but there's nothing stopping you from competing, even if you didn't start jiu-jitsu until really late, or what people would consider real late in life. I think it just offers people a lot of wonderful outlets, whether you want to use it for like the weight loss or the friendships or the activity and things like that. Yeah. So
Paul, you're an interesting guy, and there's a lot to you. You're also an extreme endurance athlete, I would say, Ironman and that sort of thing. You've ran marathons, but you've done triathlons with. What are these distances in your triathlons?
So I started. Let's back up. I did make eventually the transition to endurance sports, but then I'd like to even explain for people, for context, how did this even happen, right? Yeah. So coming out of graduate school, I was still a smaller guy. I was a smaller kid. So I was 110 pounds coming out of high school. I went on to graduate school, ended up getting a job at Ernst & Young in Atlanta, Georgia. So I wanted to get out of blue collar, Niagara Falls, New York, Western New York, the Rust Belt. Again, my dad was a construction worker. He's telling me, do not become a tradesman. This is really a hard life. You're working outdoors in factories and chemical plants and the unions, and it's just a hard life. So my parents were really strict about like, you're going to college. And that was difficult for me because I stunk at school. But by the time I got into college, I started figuring it out, started becoming a good student, get out with a really good offer to become a CPA at Ernst & Young, which for a lot of people, they don't know that, but it's a large global professional services firm, one of the biggest in the world. It's a very prestigious job for a finance accountant person coming out of school. So the unique set of factors that started to align was Ernst & Young in Atlanta had one really big, enormous client that was kind of like the anchor client, and then a whole bunch of other clients because it's a really big firm. And the anchor client for the Atlanta office was at Coca-Cola. So I didn't work on Coca-Cola, but what was interesting about the Coca-Cola connection was on every single floor, we had 6 floors in the Bank of America Tower in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. We had soda dispensers on every floor. So when you came in the morning, you were encouraged to bring your own mug, right? and we're not talking about like bring your own coffee cup. We're talking, now remember, this is back in the 90s before we knew the downsides of sugar and caffeine and, high fructose corn syrup and all these things. So we were working enormous hours, right? You're a slave to the desk. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. If you have a corporate job or you have any job working for a corporation, they want to extract a lot out of you. So we were encouraged to come in early, get to our desks, and work all day, all night, right? And we had these soda dispensers from Coca-Cola, 2 places on every floor. So we were bringing in these giant, huge mugs with the handles. And I thought this was the greatest thing ever. Like, I could drink, it was all you could drink, as much as you could drink, all day, every day. And if you work 7 days a week, you could just load up on soda all day, every day. And it was right there. Like, you want Coke, root beer, Sprite, you name it, you got it. So I now become this sedentary corporate worker who sat at a desk doing nothing but eating fast food and drinking soda. Now, keep in mind, I came out of high school at 110 pounds. By very quickly into my corporate year, the end of my first year in corporate America. Now, given I had a growth spurt in college, so I went from like 5'6" as a freshman in college to 5'10" graduating from graduate school. So I did have a late growth spurt. I did start to fill out. But I went from weighing 110 pounds coming out of high school. I was 220 pounds as ending my first year in corporate America. 220 pounds of not athleticism. I had high cholesterol. I had an ulcer. I had high blood pressure. I was having all kinds of health issues, but I didn't know at the time, right? We were just, you didn't know any better, right? Because it was that phase of humanity, right? So I never made the connection of what I ate or what I drank.
You're probably also in a building with everybody you hang out with all day does the same thing as you are doing. So it's normal.
It's totally normal. It's totally normal to go to Wendy's or Burger King or get pizza brought in, and you're surrounded by like-minded people. Like, it's all about getting in work and putting in the hours, and then we turn to food. How many people could relate to this? How many of us at some phase of our life, or maybe now, can relate to turning to food for comfort and sanctuary because other areas of your life are not going as you thought or not going well at all, right? And can people relate to that? And for me, when I look back at that phase of my life, that was totally what was happening. I was sinking in all these areas of my life. I didn't have friends. I didn't have a fun life. I didn't have activities. Everything was just about like working for this corporation and drinking soda and eating fast food and trying to get promoted. And that's not a good thing. So now I'm not even I didn't even hit mid-20s yet, right? Like, I'm not even 25 years old, and I had what I thought was my dream job. But here I am hating my job. I don't have friends. I don't have activities. I'm in horrible shape. I'm experiencing real health issues. I have migraine headaches. I have ulcers. I have high blood pressure. I'm probably pre-diabetic, even though they didn't test me for diabetes. And now all of a sudden, I just find myself in a world of hurt. Everything was going down quick in my life. And I had some really, really hard decisions to make of what to do about this. And eventually I had to make some really tough choices. I had to actually come to terms with like quitting my job, but then I had to like turn my relationships around, or actually get relationships in my life. And I had to turn my health around, because at the rate I was going, I was putting on so much weight, and not good weight, that I was a ticking time bomb, right? Like I was just going to turn into a really obese, sick person with not a bright future. So in Atlanta, every 4th of July, they have this thing called the Peachtree Road Race. And the Peachtree Road Race is, I believe it's the largest 10K on earth. It's like 60,000 people or something crazy. And it's a 10K race, and it's a big party. So the race kicks off, they break you up in all these groups, and it just, like 60,000 people run through the streets of Atlanta. And then at the end, it's like this big party in this park. And it's just a big deal that they play it on TV and everybody knows about it, right? Like everybody in Georgia knows about the Peachtree Road Race. So I kept hearing about it and telling myself, and I kept saying to myself, like, one of these years I'm going to run the Peachtree Road Race, because I just felt like that was maybe something that could be good for me. And eventually I did. I said, this is the year, and like a New Year's resolution, this is the year I'm going to do the Peachtree Road Race. And I bought a pair of sneakers, a pair of running shoes, and at 220 pounds and in horrible shape, I could barely run from my mailbox to the next mailbox. I have to go out and figure out how to go run so I could work my way up to running a 10K, which is a 6.2 mile run. And trust me, when I started, I couldn't run 100 yards without like gasping. Like I just couldn't do it. But I would kind of go run 100 yards the one day, and then the next day I would try to run a little bit further to like the next telephone pole or the next mailbox, or maybe take a break and then turn around and then jog back. But that's kind of how I like fumbled around in the start. And then I eventually just figured it out, and I show up to the Peachtree Road Race in the early 2000s, and I actually run the race. And I didn't finish it in under an hour, which is kind of like, oh, did you finish the Peachtree in under an hour? And I was like, no, I couldn't do it. I tried. It wasn't because it was too crowded. Like I could not do it, but I finished it, and I was so proud of myself. And I could tell I kind of turned a corner. And then I end up meeting some people at a Christmas party. I had my own firm at this point, and at one of my clients held a Christmas party, and I show up at this Christmas party, and I don't know anybody, and I'm just kind of making small talk, but I hear like this group over here talking about running, and I just became attracted. And they're all drinking. I don't drink, but they're all drinking. And they're talking about running and running races. And then of course, they're under the influence at this point. They're like, we should run a marathon. And I'm like all perked up, like, wow, they're talking about running and running a marathon. So I come over and kind of introduce myself, like, hey, you guys like running? Because I ran the Peachtree. And they're like, yeah. And so we start talking about like, we're going to run some marathon together. But I kind of took them serious, but then again, I was like, they're all drinking, and the next morning they're going to come to their senses. Well, it turns out they woke up the next day and they all remembered the conversation. And they're like, no, let's all get together and train, and let's do a marathon together. And that was really important, of this group coming together for a common, like, we're all going to hold each other accountable, right? On Sundays, we're going to do our long runs together at these various parks, and we'll work our way up from running like 8 miles one Sunday to 9 miles to 10 miles to 11 miles to 12 miles. We just kept going. And sure enough, we go and do a marathon together, and I'm like, we did it. And, it was just the most life-changing moment for really all of us to kind of have that breakthrough of, we're not super athletes, we're out of shape corporate people, but we kind of all came together and accomplished this thing together. And it really started changing all of our lives, because now we kind of had friends and a community and support and a goal and all these things that in hindsight, of course that made sense. Of course that worked, where all these other times you tried to go on a diet or tried to begin running or doing an exercise program, it didn't work. Like now I can look back and go, of course that worked. So fast forward from that adventure, I go on to run a bunch more marathons, like trying to get good at marathoning, and I get better and better at marathoning. And then one day, someone starts giving me a hard time. This guy I met is a triathlete, and he's like, yeah, like you ran some marathons, big deal. Like real athletes do triathlon. And I'm like, I don't know much about triathlon, except it's like swim, bike, and run and all that. So he just kind of starts like busting my chops, calling me not a real athlete, even though now I've run a lot of marathons. So I go out and I buy a bike, and I don't know how to swim, but I put it in my head like, well, I'm going to go figure this out, and I'm going to go do a triathlon. And at the time, I didn't know the difference. Like there's like in running, there's a 5K, a 10K, a half a marathon, which is 13.1, and then there's a full marathon, 26.2 miles. Well, in triathlon, there's what's called a sprint distance, and then there's an Olympic distance, which is actually the distance they do in the Olympics. It's like a 1,500 meter swim and a 10K run at the end, and a 40 kilometer bike, which is about 24 point something miles. And then there's a half Ironman. And then there's actually the full Ironman distance. And the full Ironman distance is 2.4 mile swim, 112 miles on the bike, and then a full 26.2 mile run. And you've got 17 hours to complete this event in one shot. So I don't start out. No one starts out really at Ironman, but I just start out trying to do triathlon. But at the time, I don't even know how to swim. Like I thought I knew how to swim, but I laugh, and I've told this story before. Of a lot of people could probably relate to it. What it turned out was I knew how to jump in a swimming pool to do cannonballs and can openers and all these like splash moves, and then like doggy paddle back to the ladder, back to the deck, so you can get out and go do another cannonball. So I kind of thought, well, I know how to swim. I know how to not drown in a swimming pool doing cannonballs. But the truth was, like, I didn't know how to like swim, like without a bottom or without walls to push off of. So that became sort of a interesting thing of, well, how do you learn how to swim? And I did. I took swim lessons from this woman in triathlon who taught an after-school program to little kids. So I actually took swim lessons in the afternoon in an after-school program with little kids with mom watching, which makes you really weird, right? You're either like a creepo, like stalking kids, or you're like, it's just really, really awkward. And I'm like, I'm so embarrassed. Like, I don't know if I can go through with this. Like, it was just that awkward. But I was like, no, this woman told me she could teach me how to swim. I just have to show up. And I just committed to myself, no, I'm really going to learn how to swim so I could do a triathlon. And I go through with it, as embarrassing as it was. But I actually learned how to swim without, drowning and pushing off the walls. And I could just start to swim longer and longer distances. So eventually I go do triathlons, and then I go do half Ironmans, and then I work my way up to full Ironman distances and fall in love with endurance sports at this point. I fall in love with Ironman triathlon. So end up doing all in, I've done 13 sanctioned Ironman triathlons, but there was a point where in 2010, as I was attempting to qualify for what's called Ironman World Championships, and that's always in Kona, Hawaii, the second Saturday after the full moon in Kona, Hawaii, and that's what we always see on NBC, the World Championships of Ironman, and that's what I started watching that every year and going, wow. But there's sanctioned events all over the world, and you have to do these sanctioned events to qualify. Why get involved in this whole infrastructure and subculture of endurance sports? But eventually my health starts to fade. I was unknown to me why. I start getting slower. I'm training a lot. I start gaining weight. My times are coming down. At the time, I'm so committed to qualifying for Ironman World Championships. I have a blog going. I have this following. I put it out there how this normal guy is going to go out there and qualify for Ironman World Championships. And to put it in context, like to qualify for World Championships, you need to be like in the top 2% of like your age group. And I was closing in where I was like top single digits, like 7, 8, 9%. And I'm like, okay, I'm within striking distance now. Like I'm going to close in and finally close the deal and fulfill this dream and make this happen, and it's going to be awesome. But then it ends up not happening, and my health starts going down, and I start suffering all these things. And long story short, I get diagnosed eventually, by hiring a private physician, I get diagnosed with a brain tumor. And this was in 2011. And from 2010 and 2011, it was just this one bad episode after another of trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And I thought I had cancer or rheumatoid arthritis and all these things. And I'm turning to Dr. Google and just trying to think, like, what is going on? And I eventually get diagnosed with a brain tumor, and they rush me in, and I have surgery, and I have like this multiple year recovery process from going through this major event. And that's what stopped my endurance career, but that's also what eventually led me in some weird, wild way to find jiu-jitsu as a older person after a traumatic life event. And people say, well, how does that even happen? Like, how the heck do you find jiu-jitsu, at this stage of life? Like, why would you do that? And it was really coming to terms with a lot of stuff. Like, I had to come to terms with dying. Like, they told me, like, this may not turn out well. Like, I actually had to call my parents and say, your son's not doing well. Like, my life is falling apart. My health is horrible. Like, they don't know what's going on. And then it's like, no, they know what's wrong with me. I have a brain tumor. It's the size of like a muscadine grape, like a little smaller than a golf ball, but bigger than a grape, like a normal sized grape. And it's like straight back between, like, if you had like the bridge of my nose between my eyes, you go straight back. It's straight back between my eyes. So, you go through these episodes and you have to process all this information. And leading up to that, I had a whole series of physical and emotional and mental breakdowns, right? Like, I'm falling apart. I start to become depressed. I'm suffering. I'm having psychedelic dreams. My hormones are out of whack. My body can't regulate cold and hot. Like, I'm just suffering from all different angles, right? So that was like something I just had to navigate.
Yeah.
And, eventually you have to come to terms with you might check out. And I was in my early 40s, and that's something that maybe some other people could relate to, or have had family members go through those experiences of, holy crap, like you just don't see yourself. No one is on the school bus saying this is how you think your life is going to turn out, right? Like, you just don't see that coming. You just have to kind of deal with it. So I had to come to grips with, oh my gosh, like, I might die. And even then, like, coming out of that whole experience, like, what do you do? Like, how do you rebuild? Like, how do you crawl out of these holes in life? And how do you rebuild yourself? And what's important to you? And what really matters? And that's where eventually I already became a fan of the UFC. I don't know about, like, did you watch the first UFC? Was that what was the turning point?
No, I didn't. I eventually watched the first UFC, but I didn't watch it as it happened.
So this is another funny story where even in college, I was in college still. I was in graduate school in 1993. And I remember during that stint, I was living at home for little stretches because I was going from, like, I had part-time jobs and I had money and I didn't have money and I was broke and I had my own apartment and I had to move back in with my parents. And so it's actually the time where I'm living back with my parents, but I was in graduate school. And I remember telling my mom, because this is 1993, I said, Mom, there's this thing with the cable company, and it's a pay-per-view. And if you call the cable company, you could buy this thing called a pay-per-view, and they will let you watch this like event. And back at the time, it was called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And I just remember that it was being advertised on TV, and you could watch like karate versus judo versus wrestling versus boxing. And I was so fascinated by this. Why? Because this goes back to like me being fascinated with the theory of martial arts where you could defend yourself, right? Because we all were like the proverbial little kid getting sand kicked in his face. My mom is like, kid, like, come on, like, you're getting an education. We don't have any money. We don't need this nonsense. We don't need this, right? And I'm like, no. Like, I really need to watch this. I'll pay for it. Just let me buy it. Let me call the cable company and figure this out. And I actually do. So I go ahead, and to this day, I recorded the Ultimate Fighting Championship 1 in November of 1993 and I go on to watch Royce Gracie win the Ultimate Fighting Championship using this thing that is now being described as jiu-jitsu, right? So, and what was so attractive about that to a guy with my mindset, or to so many people that are jiu-jitsu fans today, it was at least it appeared to be true on TV, because it's TV. You don't know it's true or false, right? But at least it appeared that a smaller, weaker guy could beat a bigger, stronger opponent, because that's what we saw in the Ultimate Fighting Championship 1. Royce Gracie beat these really big, strong guys or Ken Shamrock, who looked like a Greek statue goddess, of muscles and ripped and abs. And it's like, oh my God, Ken Shamrock is this champion Shudo fighter that's all chiseled and mean looking. And he's going to murk this guy in this white gi who looks like he's a corporate worker, right? But that's not what happened. We saw jiu-jitsu, and that's what really set off jiu-jitsu in the United States. It was, I believe, Ultimate Fighting Championship 1. That's where we got the first taste. So for me, the only thing that, and I don't know if others or even you could relate to this, my first exposure to jiu-jitsu was one of awe and awesomeness, but it to me still didn't register that's something that someone could do. That's something a CPA could do, or a doctor could do, or any job, or if you're a kid or a man or a woman or older. Jiu-jitsu to me was something that professional fighters did to prepare for getting in the cage. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that how you looked at jiu-jitsu first?
I don't remember how I remember I wanted to try it, but there was not a lot of opportunity when I first saw it.
Yeah, so for me, and that was the same thing. At the time, I'm in Niagara Falls, which is a suburb of Buffalo. We don't have jiu-jitsu schools in Niagara Falls. There is no jiu-jitsu. The only jiu-jitsu that was really happening back in the early 90s was, Southern California was starting to turn on. Craig Kukuk in, New York, New Jersey with Henzo was starting to pop up. There were some Gracie seminars being done, but this wasn't something you walked into a jiu-jitsu academy or I want to sign up and take classes. No, this is the early mid 1990s. So again, it was more that, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. I know this thing, it technically exists, but it's still not accessible and it's still not accepted. Right. And because that's the other thing with, I don't know about you, when you, even now, do you ever feel uncomfortable? When I started, I was almost embarrassed to tell people that I did jiu-jitsu, or heaven forbid that I love jiu-jitsu. Were you like that?
I don't recall that. I still don't tell everyone I meet that I do jiu-jitsu. They kind of have to, I have to pre-qualify them to somebody who might be interested in that, or it has to come up in conversation. But I could do a better job of getting the word out for the people that I know. But it's not one of the first things. But I guess I'm kind of I do that same thing with my job. I don't tell everybody I meet what I do for a living. I'm not.
Yeah,
but
for me, I don't know if it was being a corporate guy, or I was a closet jiu-jitsu practitioner for my first big stretch. I was almost ashamed to tell people, or embarrassed to share, because why? It's well, that's weird. You're a corporate guy that rolls around with other people, or you want cauliflower. It's no, I don't want cauliflower ears, or I'm not there to fight. I just loved, I knew I loved jiu-jitsu, but for some reason I just felt I didn't want to share that about myself. There was hesitation, there was embarrassment, there was I would say I was a closet jiu-jitsu practitioner for my whole first stretch, and I don't even know what made me kind of turn the corner, because now I feel like I'm really outspoken advocate. Like I really want to share the goodness of jiu-jitsu, and like, hey, you're a kid, you could do jiu-jitsu. You're a woman, you could do jiu-jitsu. You're over 50, you could do jiu-jitsu. Like, you got to do jiu-jitsu. It's like awesome, right? So I went somehow from like, I'm not telling anybody I do jiu-jitsu. They're going to think I'm completely bonkers and weird, to no, I'll like, hey, do you like jiu-jitsu? Because there's a chance I'll be like, hey, I watch UFC, or I do this, or I do that, or I did some other martial arts, or I'm looking for something new to try. Because what's the other reality? There's something for everybody. Some people do go through life where that phase was really important to them, but for whatever reason, it comes to an end. Like me, I loved Ironman triathlon. I lived Ironman triathlon for years. I dedicated my life to all the math and physiology and coaches and trainers and the whole thing it took to get in the human body to do amazing things. But it came to an end, not because it was even my choice, because it wasn't my choice. Everything was stripped away from me.
Yeah.
And then I found myself without friends, because all my friends were triathletes. My whole social outlet was triathlon. My outlet was triathlon. All my energy went to triathlon. My exercise was triathlon. All I dreamed about was triathlon. Like everything was triathlon. And then what happens? Like you lose that, but you can't call up people on a Saturday and be like, hey, you want to like watch a game or go out for food? They're like, no, man. Why? Because we're training for our big race. Like we're still training for triathlon. They don't want to hang out or go bowling or do other stuff. They're still into their passionate endeavor. So that's another reality where there might be people coming off life-changing events. Maybe it was, their other activity, or maybe they're coming off a divorce, or maybe they're just tired, or they moved, or they just need something new. And that's where it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe you're the guy or that woman who's ready for something new, or you tell me your kid can't find the right activity because your kid doesn't like playing soccer with all the other kids who play soccer. Someone's like, maybe he likes jiu-jitsu. There's a kids jiu-jitsu program right around the corner. Maybe you could try it, right? So it's kind of funny. So yeah, it's but that's another thing. So yeah, going back to Ironman, that's how I got into endurance sports and really got into the physiology of human performance and coaching and learning. And that's also where now I have this perspective that even became valuable for my experience with jiu-jitsu, because I'm not knocking jiu-jitsu. I love jiu-jitsu, right? So I love jiu-jitsu, but I could also share honestly, like if people ask, jiu-jitsu is no joke, like 20 years behind other developed sports in training methodology, process protocol, physiological testing, like all these things on how to create superhumans and super athletes and trainers, and how all these things mix. I almost find it shocking how behind the times jiu-jitsu is, because it's like, oh my gosh, they discovered this stuff like in running back in the 1970s, and the average jiu-jitsu practitioner knows nothing about those physiological realities of like running an annual training plan, or physiological markers, or how to gauge recovery, or the tools that are out there, or how you get coaching, or how you build a training plan, or just how do you integrate strength training, or how do you properly do strength training, or managing weight, or all these things. It's like you guys are literally 20 years behind. So that was another fascinating discovery for me, where I just kind of look around and like, wow, this is amazing. And now I could recognize there are people that are aware of this and are bringing new, like they're integrating and cross-pollinizing scientific and athletic principles. They really are starting to integrate them into jiu-jitsu, and those athletes have a big advantage because they're actually getting caught up faster than others. And that's where I think the sport is going to go through this big leap over the next 5 or 10 years, no different than marathoning or collegiate swimming or triathlon or all these things, because the cross-pollination of information is starting to make its way into jiu-jitsu. And I could already tell and it's also being led sometimes by UFC fighters, right? Because now UFC has their institute, their performance institute in Las Vegas, and they're bringing in like world-class physiologists, and they're bringing in experts in nutrition and strength training and protocols, and that, because jiu-jitsu guys are training alongside UFC fighters, it is starting to trickle through. So there's people in Vegas that are starting to get word, and then it's starting to trickle out. And that's where even like Demetrius Johnson's conditioning coach, he's now starting to penetrate into the jiu-jitsu industry. And, you know, he runs 8 weeks out, and he has like the Morpheus app and these recovery tools and gadgets that you can measure recovery. And I'm like, yeah, now we're talking. Like, this is what, like when we go back to like Iron Man, like there's all these gadgets and computer tools and testing and labs that you do to say, where's the athlete on their fitness curve, and testing. And you actually ride bikes with what's called power meters, and it's calculating your watts and your heart rate and cadence and all this stuff. Like you're just capturing all this data, and you actually have personal coaches that your coach could be in Colorado, but they could look at your data and look at your training and guide you and say, well, this is where we're going to focus at this stage of your training as you start looking at if you want to be a competitive athlete, or you want to lose more weight or build more endurance or peak for a race or do whatever. It's like, this is where all these other sports are, and even pro sports, especially like if you look at NFL or basketball or baseball, like it's all about this cutting edge science, and jiu-jitsu's just not there yet. Right. So that's going to be another big development that will be coming, which is exciting. And the other good thing with jiu-jitsu is there's more and more people that can now make a living doing the sport and being involved with the industry. So whether, people are doing podcasts full time in the jiu-jitsu, or writing articles for magazines for jiu-jitsu, or having academies, or coaching, or having DVD instructionals. I mean, guys and women could have real careers in the jiu-jitsu industry. That's a big breakthrough that has also happened in all these other sports. But it's not just like 5 people are making their living off of jiu-jitsu now. No, like tons of people are making their living full time, often very good living, off of jiu-jitsu now. Don't you see that yourself?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people do that, and that's a good thing. If somebody's able to dedicate that amount of time and energy to something, of course, the results will be better. And that's going to happen, I think, more and more as the sport grows. And if with some sports that shrink and die off, that goes away. I don't predict that with jiu-jitsu, but I do anticipate it, growing. Jiu-jitsu growing and getting larger, and more people, not just getting benefits from jiu-jitsu, but more and more people ultimately like benefiting from that with careers and making a living and supporting the family with that.
Yeah, and it's very exciting. And that's where, jiu-jitsu still has some old paradigms that they have to break away from. And why? Because jiu-jitsu really grew and flourished arising out of Brazil, and some of these Brazilian methodologies and even business mindsets. Like, how many times today do you still hear of feelings getting hurt because someone opened up an academy within 15 miles of another academy. And the one owner is like, that's like against the law. You can't do that. And it's like, wait, that's like breaking the rules of economics. But jiu-jitsu guys still don't understand the benefits even of growing the sport. So I often hear these, I'm in Atlanta. There's a lot of jiu-jitsu in Atlanta, not like Southern California, but there's a lot of jiu-jitsu in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of schools. And now there's more and more and more black belts coming through, and they made it through the pipeline. And a fraction of those want their own school. Well, what happens? They want to go open up their own school. So what is it going to be where there's only so much square mileage in a city, even if it's a big city, whether it's Chicago or New York or Atlanta or Miami or whatever city. So undoubtedly some black belt's like, I want to open up a school. I'm going to go do it here. And someone gets really upset, like, hey man, you can't open up a school. You're, only 13 miles away from me. And it's like, well, 13 miles in Atlantic traffic. You might as well consider that Mars. Like that could literally be a 50-minute drive in Atlanta traffic, like ridiculous commute. And if you're a parent wanting to put a kid in a kids program, you're not going to drive 15 miles in Atlanta traffic at rush hour, which is when kids go to after school programs because they're in school all day, right? So parents are trying to get to their kids to, after school programs or picking them up at 5:30 when there's heavy traffic. So I just laugh and try to give examples of like, can you imagine if Home Depot told Lowe's, whoa, Lowe's, you can't put a store within 15 miles of Home Depot because we're Home Depot. It's like, no, Lowe's will say there's a Home Depot, we're going across the street. Or McDonald's can't tell Burger King like, hey, you sold a hamburger, so now you can't eat at our hamburger place. It's like, no, it's competition. And that's where I think like jiu-jitsu is getting even so big that there's something for everybody. And now I'm even starting to see like this whole girls and gis movement. And I also do some training down at Buckhead Jiu-Jitsu, and they have like a women's program that's really starting to pick up steam, and it's wonderful. So it's like, hey, if you're a woman that even wants to do jiu-jitsu, you can even go there and train and do jiu-jitsu with a lot of other women. Isn't that attractive? And then other schools might have really good kids programs. Or I train at Creighton Mixed Martial Arts, but oddly, the dynamic at Creighton, there are a lot of guys. The vast majority of guys are 180 pounds plus. And we have some really big boys and athletic. We have like some ex-football players, collegiate and pro football players, like ex-Atlanta Falcons players that are coming in and be like, yeah, I want to do MMA and jiu-jitsu. It's like, well, how much do you weigh, man? And like, I weigh 280. And this isn't a fat 280. This is like someone who like graduated from Clemson University and played on, national caliber Division I defensive linemen. And now they're coming in for jiu-jitsu. And it's like, yeah, I'm a Masters 4 athlete that walks around at 165 pounds. Like, that's not a good matchup for me, right? Like, that's just not a good matchup for me to just go roll and have fun and participate in jiu-jitsu, even though I love competing. So that's where it even gets to like different. I even notice here in Atlanta, like different gyms are even starting to like have little sub niches.
Yeah. As it grows, those several good things happen. Gyms get kind of niches that will develop and draw people to them, and the quality of business that's being done goes up. If there's only one person in town who knows jiu-jitsu and he's a jerk and you want to do jiu-jitsu, you're kind of having to train with the jerk. But if there's really 15 or 20, you get to shop around a little bit and find the one that matches up with you, and B, you get to pick you kind of look at the teams and see where you fit better.
Right. And the other thing is like at different life cycles, let's go through an example. Like, I can't remember because I've listened to so many BJJBrick podcasts. Have you ever had Eddie Cummings on your podcast? But have you? I can't recall.
No, we have not.
But he would be he's a fascinating guy in the jiu-jitsu world, right? But he just recently switched gyms, right? He was at Henzo's and he was part of the Danaher Death Squad, and he was all part of that Danaher Death Squad, like really getting that leg lock game fully developed and processed and sequenced, right? He was one of the Danaher Death Squads. It was Eddie Cummings, Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonin, John Danaher, Nicky Ryan. Like there were like 6 to 8 guys that were just always in the gym, and they worked on leg locks until that system kicked out, right? That funnel became so perfected for them. But eventually, for whatever reason, I don't know the story, like Eddie Cummings decided, like, I just don't want to, I can't, either I'm competing against my own teammates or it's not working out. But now Eddie Cummings is at Unity, right? Which is just something that happened. Again, I don't know why. And I don't know if that Unity will be his eventual permanent place. It just so happened he felt he needed a change. But what if Henzo was like, wait, there can't be another gym within 15 miles of Henzo's? It's like, well, that's bad for customers, right? That's bad for jiu-jitsu. And that's not to say Unity or Henzo is suffering. No, they have very awesome academies, right? Then even down the street, there's like Marcelo Garcia. I mean, do you know how many elite schools there are in New York City? And they all offer something to practitioners, and people get to choose. And maybe there comes a time where you say, I don't know, maybe I'm a blue belt, maybe I'm a purple belt, maybe I'm a black belt, maybe I just need a change, right? And that's also the benefit of focusing on the growth of the sport and jiu-jitsu as a whole, rather than someone's attempt at protectionism. That really isn't what's good for jiu-jitsu. It's just false protectionism for their own economic, maybe insecurity. So,
Paul, we kind of went over a lot of things here. You're super into the distance and running and triathlons, and you've done bunch. Would you say 13 Ironmans? And,
13.
Which is an amazing feat. To do one is just phenomenal. To rack up a whole bunch of them like that, and you get a brain tumor, and it kind of just throws that whole thing out of sync of what you had going with your training, things like that. What did having that experience, how did that change you as a person?
Here's an odd thing. For a while, it didn't. It took a while for me to fully comprehend and face some things that you would have. Have you ever heard of someone that like got cancer and they actually said, wow, cancer like totally changed me? I'm almost glad. Like I've actually heard it kind of, I can't see myself saying it, but they actually have said, I'm so glad I got cancer because it totally changed me as a person. And I'm so much of a better human having gone through that experience. Now, I don't think I want cancer to go through that, just like I didn't want a brain tumor to kind of come out the other side. But going through really big deals, and big deals can happen in a lot of ways. You could lose a child. It could be you lost something important in your life, or something was taken away from you, or you had to face major crisis. It forces you to figure a lot of stuff out. And for me, it created confusion because I didn't know how to deal with some stuff. Even my own, at times I was going through depression. Like I was just so unhappy and so unhealthy, and like I just wanted to give up. But then as I worked my way out of that, I changed as a person. I became so much more empathetic and relatable to other people going through. Because here's another thing I realized. Do we ever really know what another human being is going through? Like, it could be a coworker, it could be a friend, it could be a training partner. Someone could be just appearing to be stressed or maybe cranky or have an outlash verbally. And then we judge them and we say, wow, that person was a jerk, or that person is Looney Tunes. But do we really know what they're going through? Like, do we really know? Because sometimes they lost something, or they're going through really big deals in their life. And now I'm so much more in tune with other people, and I'm much more open to, okay, this person is experiencing maybe some crisis. So how could I help that person out? And then for myself, as I came out the other side, it led to jiu-jitsu. Why? Because it made no sense at the time. Like, am I really training jiu-jitsu from the self-defense standpoint. It's like, no, I understand jiu-jitsu is better to know for self-defense. Like, God forbid someone really attacked me or my wife. Do I have a better chance of defending myself if I found myself in a physical confrontation? Absolutely. I would even go so far as to say I'm very confident in my abilities now if some random guy or some drunk was picking a fight with me for no good reason. But more important than that confidence, it was more saying, me even telling my wife, like, hey, I now recognize one way or the other, we're all going to die. Like, we're all going to get to the end of our life. And what I learned was that may even come way, way sooner than we ever imagined. And you see this because you're a firefighter and you've shown up to some crisis situations. People having health issues or a car wreck or an accident, right? You've walked upon some scenes that are probably cringeworthy, including children or otherwise healthy people, right? Haven't you as a firefighter? So what do you learn? Like, oh my gosh, like, are there guarantees? No, there really aren't. But I can tell you from earlier in my life, I didn't think like that. I really thought like getting older is not even something that like crossed my mind. Like, I just thought like, no, I'm going to live like forever. Old people is like my grandparents. Like I just did, it never even crossed my mind. Whereas you go through something serious and it's a wake up call. Like, oh, you think and I'm very healthy now. I eat all organic and I'm a nut when it comes to nutrition. I'm not drinking soda anymore. I can assure you that. But you start to recognize, hey, I might be gone. I don't know when. So if I'm going to be gone, what is it that I really want to do? Who is it that I really want to become? What is it that I really want to achieve? And I don't have, you recognize you don't really have as much time. So that also gave me the courage to try jiu-jitsu, because I told my wife, it's like, you know what? Now that I'm fully recovered from this whole brain stupid tumor, which isn't recommended. I tell people, if you have a choice,
recommended.
Yeah, don't do it. Like, go pick something else. Don't go through this brain tumor thing. It sucks. But it at the same time, I told my wife, it's like, I think I want to do this jiu-jitsu thing. And she's like, what? Like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm 46, going to walk into a MMA gym, right? That's not a normal thing, right? That most people will say, but it's like, no, I want to do jiu-jitsu. I really think I want to do jiu-jitsu. And that was the courage to say, well, then go do it. Because why? What do you really have to lose? You can go try it and you might not like it, or you can try it and maybe you're just not cut out for it, or you're horrible with it, or it just doesn't fit and you got to go try something else. That's okay. The issue is when you go through something big, it actually emboldens your courage, because you start to think, what really is the downside here? Am I worried about what other people are going to think? Am I going to succumb to social pressure or what other people are going to think or say or criticize me for? And you start to say, no, like, I don't really care what other people are going to say or think or criticize me for. This is what I really want to do for me. So that is kind of a catalyst for a lot of people going through those life-altering experiences. And it doesn't have to even be that traumatic. I think sometimes you hear people going through like a divorce and they still have that like refreshing reinvention, self-discovery, like, oh my gosh, like now I'm divorced, I can go become this whole new person because I don't have someone chirping in my ear who I am. They could really go, maybe they move, or maybe they just like, I'm going to go start running or go do dance or whatever it is, right? Like it's kind of like a total fresh slate for someone.
Yeah.
So that's really healthy if you're fortunate enough to get that opportunity, whereas some people aren't, right? Because they really did get hit by a drunk driver and it's done. It's over. Like, that was your life. You died at 18. Why? You got hit by a drunk driver. Sorry. Like, that's it. Game over. So the other thing is, how do we really learn from other people's experiences so that we can get over our own fears and go become better people and transform ourselves or get to our goals quicker. That's fascinating to me, right? Like once you start recognizing time is not maybe what you thought, that's why even learning faster is so appealing to me. Right?
Yeah.
Because I want to learn super fast. So, and is it really uncommon for people to start jiu-jitsu? Look, you're a black belt. You see white belts come through all the time. How many white belts come through and get passionate about it? They literally love jiu-jitsu. And what do they all say? How do I get better fast? How do I get better quicker? I just want to be a black belt, right? Like, don't people really think that all the time?
Yeah, I don't think very many of them have the immediate goal of a black belt, but they all want to get 2 weeks worth of training in a week. They and not have to come in and live at the gym. We all want to refine our training methods to where the hour you spend at the gym is more effective than the hour that the average person or the hour that you would have spent a year ago. Like you want to learn at an accelerated rate.
Correct. And that's why for you, because now you're a black belt and you've been around jiu-jitsu for so long and you've have all this life experience, you yourself have all these wonderful resources that you could offer new white belts. Like your first year in jiu-jitsu, this is what you want to. Why? Because can you replicate everything you need to replicate, just being on the mat? No, but there is no question. Isn't that it's a paradox, right?
Yeah.
It's a paradox where on one hand, there are no shortcuts. Because we hear that. Like, there are no shortcuts to success. And it's like, okay, I believe that. There are no shortcuts. But at the same time, there really are shortcuts, right? Because there are
better ways to do things. I tell all the blue belts, I don't tell all of them, but I think of all of them at our gym. They're all better blue belts than I was when I was a blue belt. They're so much more advantaged with their training methods and with their the people on the mats that they're learning from, and the way we roll differently now. It's a way better time. There's no better time than right now to be a white belt. It's easier than it was 10 years ago. It's easier than it was 20 years ago. You'll learn quicker now. So
absolutely.
I think like how you were talking about how the science is behind. And a lot of that science is dieting and that sort of thing. A lot of the science is, how do we learn this stuff properly? How do we teach it better?
Correct. And it's starting to pick up. And because why? It's not, right, it is a Byron Jabara in Wichita, Kansas, who's sharing what he learned from his lens of helping others, right? It is about helping others. It's your ability to pass on what you've learned the hard way, right? Because like you said, when you were a white belt and when you were a blue belt, you had to learn a lot of things through trial and error. It wasn't spoon fed to you like, hey kid, Byron, sneaky tip, do this, not that, or think about it this way, not that way, or here's some rules of thumb to follow to handle this situation, right? You actually had to be your own guinea pig. Whereas now that you've been a guinea pig on yourself, you have all these pearls and all this wisdom that now you say, aha, light bulb. I now could take all this.
Wisdom may be a stretch.
But I could take all this and now share it.
Yeah.
And make an impact with other people, which is why, even in my book, it was super important for me because I gave you a shout out in the
that's nice of you.
The prelude. But why? Because even me, who's a fanatical learner and who has all these tools and resources and all this stuff, like I just have a lot of resources available to me. But even with everything I know about learning faster, how much of an impact you personally made on my life, because why? You were willing to share through the podcast. So I got to listen to you, and then I got to listen to some of your even products and services, and then I got to listen to you bringing on guests, and they're sharing pearls and they're sharing experiences, and it's now so wonderful because it's spreading, right? And that's what That's when the magic really starts to happen. And that's why I'm so happy that it's happening in jiu-jitsu now, because there are more people like Byron Jabara that are like, let me share some pearls. And now, because of technology, because think back 20 years ago, if you were in Wichita, no one would know who you are because the internet wasn't where it was today. There are no podcasts. There are no digital books or audio, right? Like, yeah, we were just in a different place. Whereas now, and that's why even in the book, you know, you hear about some of these practitioners. Eli Knight, great example, right? Because he's in my book. He's from Paducah, Kentucky. And it's like, isn't that funny? Like, how is it that a guy from Paducah, Kentucky can become so much of an influence on people in the jiu-jitsu world? Because he has a huge following on YouTube. Or Chewy, right? Nick Albin, who just won bronze in the ADCC. How does a guy from, you know, Derby City Martial Arts have such an impact on so many practitioners? And that's what's wonderful that I just love. It's the people before us now sharing, which now, again, I agree. If you're a white belt or you're a blue belt, oh my gosh, you have it made in the shade compared to blue or white belts. No joke, even 5 years ago, but especially 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's night and day different, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I still enjoyed jiu-jitsu back then. But it was a lot different than, and I know every gym is different. We talked about that, kind of like different gyms have different niches and cultures, but like every roll was a fight that we didn't throw punches or kicks. Like everybody I rolled with tried to kill me and I tried to kill him back. Like it was always intense. And I rolled this morning and I think I started almost every round in side control on bottom. I remember thinking, if I can get this blue belt to side control, maybe I would have a chance to submit him, but I never could. Like they were fighting so hard, I couldn't pass their guard. I couldn't get him on their back. I couldn't, like, they would never give up a position. That's not a great environment to learn. It's like if I'm going to go learn how to hit a baseball and you're able, Paul, to throw a 100-mile fastball, I'm never going to hit that ball. I'm not going to use proper technique or form. I'm struggling just to see this stupid ball. I don't know. I've never played baseball, like seriously.
Right,
but I was so, as a group, it was just, it wasn't the best place to learn. Yeah, we were learning jiu-jitsu and getting better, but there wasn't a lot of play. There wasn't a lot of like exploring areas of your jiu-jitsu. It was just try to make it work, try to mash that onto the other person and see if it worked and see if you can pull that sort of technique off on them. And it's changed a lot. And I don't think that's just local here where I'm at. I think that's a lot of places.
Right. And that's the other wonderful thing, because now even in science and research, we learn that humans learn differently, right? Even children, some children like will learn audibly better, or listening to a lecture, or doing the math problems themselves, or watching or reading. Like there's just different ways to learn. And that's now even the cool thing about where jiu-jitsu is getting, where different gyms have different instructors, and different instructors are actually a little bit more beneficial for a certain type of student who might learn differently. Like there really are more. I laugh. I have this term. I have two terms that I use a lot, like on Instagram or Facebook. Like I'll call some guys meatheads or lug nuts, right? And these are like the bigger smash, they're just meatheads, right? That's how they roll jiu-jitsu. There's nothing cerebral about it. There's no technique. They want to get side control and muscle their way into a Kimura or Americana, and they will try for 4 minutes straight until they hope to get an Americana on you. Like that's their jiu-jitsu, right? And they might even still be a blue belt or purple belt, but that's where it is. But then I train at even a lot at this other place. It's called Buckhead Jiu-Jitsu. It's very close to Georgia Institute of Technology. And ironically, I learned like a lot of the students are not only professionals, but they're like doctors and lawyers and neuroscientists and tech programmers, and some of them went to like Ivy League schools, and this one went to Rochester Institute of Technology or Georgia Tech or Northwestern. And it's like, oh my gosh, these are all like smarty pants. This is like Big Bang Theory meets jiu-jitsu, right? They're all these cerebral, smaller, technical rollers, but I could tell they all roll differently and learn differently than other gyms, right? Because it's starting to create its own culture within itself. So it's like, okay, this is how you have to teach this method of jiu-jitsu. And it's Joe Rogan has a term for them. They'll laugh and call these types of practitioners like assassin nerds, right? They look like total nerds, and they are. But then you get on the mat with them and they murk you. And it's so satisfying to watch or to roll with them because they're not big. They don't roll with strength, but they will tie you in knots. And when you look at them, you're like, oh my gosh, this guy is just going to get creamed. And they are good technical practitioners. And I love that part, right? Because that's more me. Like I like technical rolls. I don't like, even though I use pressure and, you kind of learn how to use your weight or smash or crossface or things that you need are part of jiu-jitsu. It's still that cerebral, technical way of approaching the art, right? So that's my preference, and that doesn't make it right or wrong. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying if you don't roll like some of these other people, you're doing it wrong. No, you do it the way you want to do it, as long as you're not hurting people. But that's also really exciting how there's something for everybody. And now there's even learning modules and courses and resources and online and digital and books and podcasts. It's like there is so much cool stuff. I think now it's how do you sift through that information to get to where it would make the biggest impact on your life. That's an important step.
Yeah. And you're saying we're all learn differently, and we're all also motivated differently. I try, that's one of my things is when I meet somebody who's new on the mats, I try to figure out what makes this person tick, or at least a little bit of that. And you described, being a person who runs marathons, and that guy was kind of giving you some crap about, but you're not really an athlete. You don't do triathlons, and that motivated you. Not everybody would have been motivated by that. Some people would have been upset with the guy. Some people were like, well, I'm not an athlete. Well, I guess I'm done doing this. Doesn't even count. Different people would react differently. And I think that's something that I need to work on, is to try to get a better read on what brings this person here. And are they the white belt who is going to love getting tapped out, 5 times in 5 minutes? Or are they going to more enjoy the technical flow or a good even match with another white belt? I don't know. It's hard to read people like that.
It is. And I think you're onto something where it's so important, because me, like at my gym, like sometimes I end up being like the crazy uncle or the father figure to a lot of people that wander into the gym. But what should every even academy owner know, or someone that works at an academy, or someone that's always at the academy that wants to be part of the culture? It's learning not only what motivates them, but what's their why. Are they there to lose weight? Are they there to get self-confidence? Are they there to make friends? Is it there because they want to learn technical jiu-jitsu? Are they there to compete? Like, there's all these very valid reasons, because some of my really good friends at jiu-jitsu are people that I know deep down they like jiu-jitsu, but they have no intention of ever competing. And truth be told, they don't even like rolling that hard, whether they're afraid of taking a blow to the face or going into work with a black eye, or they really just don't want to roll hard. They have their own reasons, but they still love jiu-jitsu. They love flowing around. They like breaking a sweat, but they don't want to be on, Spinal Tap, turn the amp up to 11. Like, why'd you turn it up to 11? Because it's 11. Well, why not put it at 10? Because it's not 11, right? And because we all know people that you bump fists, and what do they give you? 11. all the time. And there's guys that, and I like technical rolling. I like flow rolling. I like rolling high volume. That doesn't make it right, but I love going to class. I love being on the mats. But at my age and where I am and what I want to accomplish in jiu-jitsu, I can't roll at 11 every class. I just can't do it, nor is it smart. And I'm smart enough to know that that's not a superior training protocol. So I like rolling a lot at like level 5 or level 6 or level 7, and then bringing it up to 8 if I have to, but a lot of volume, right? So that works for me. But then there's other guys that they still only want to come in 2 to 3 times a week, but they still want to roll level 5, 6, 7. It's like, perfect, roll with me. Or they're a woman, or they're a kid, or they're whatever. They're just tired. They're just so proud. They're proud that they made it to jiu-jitsu class. And that's awesome, right?
Yeah.
Because why? It really is better than them going home and having a bad caloric meal and sitting on the couch and doing nothing. Like, if you got to class, it's a win.
Yeah.
You're going to have fun. You're going to be with your friends. You should. Like, if you're not at a school where you're going into jiu-jitsu, or every time you think you want to go to jiu-jitsu, you're like, I don't know if I have the energy for it because I'm going to get blasted, then you really have a problem, I think, because you're just going to have turnover, because eventually over a long period of time, no one's going to be able to sustain that if they're not really into that. So why should we be the judge and tell people like everybody has to roll as if we're at Atos, right? I love following Atos. I love watching Josh Hinger, go at it with these guys in practice, right? Like, they mimic competition, right? But they're also younger guys at world-class level, specifically training for that set of goals. But do we all really have that set of goals? Are we all going to show up at the Pyramid or Las Vegas Convention Center to try to win world gold, right? No. 90+% of practitioners never compete. So then once we acknowledge that stat, how do we break that down even further to help them enjoy the jiu-jitsu journey and reap all the rewards of jiu-jitsu?
Yeah.
That will change their life.
And that really it brings us to your book.
Yes.
You already mentioned Principle 20, know your why. And I when you said that, I cued right into that. Like, yep, that's in there. That's a very important thing. And sometimes your why changes. I think a lot of us show up for self-defense or interest or to lose weight or whatever. And as the years tick by, we get older and our lifestyles change. Your why can change, but you also, I think you need to know that it's changed. If your why at the beginning is to compete, and, after 10 years go by, you got a real serious job, you've got a family, you've got all these other obligations, and competitions aren't going super hot for you. You're not nearly as successful as you used to be. Does your why change a little bit, and you continue to enjoy and get all the benefits out of jiu-jitsu, or do you just kind of peter out and say, well, I now can't compete well at jiu-jitsu. That was my why. I'm out of here. But that's just a little bit about the why. But so Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life, how to create an extraordinary life through jiu-jitsu. You have a lot of different principles in here you talk about. What was the motivation or the idea behind this book?
So the book was created because I believe I'm like so many others who got addicted to jiu-jitsu. I love jiu-jitsu. So in the beginning, like I said, I was afraid to tell people I like jiu-jitsu. I feared that they would think it's weird, but I later came to terms with this. I love jiu-jitsu. I'm passionate about it. I like others. I wanted to get good at it. I wanted to learn faster. And like other people, we all get these thoughts of, I want to get good fast. So I was one of those anxious to learn and get better. So I am a person with a lot of self-initiative. I started doing research. I wanted to learn and document and take notes as I thought there was something there for me. So I did want to go through the process and document it. Like, I already wrote a couple books. I've written hundreds of articles. Like, I already had this blog that, kind of was in triathlon years ago. Like, I wanted to replicate some of the things that I learned and went through with triathlon. So the first step is, and I think a lot of instructors and academy owners forget this. Like we talked about, me and you and I, like I was able to watch UFC 1. Yeah, that had a lasting lifetime imprint on my brain of Royce Gracie introducing jiu-jitsu. That was 1993. Like there's a lot of people that they're walking into an academy in their mid-20s. They're 25 years old. They were born in 1993. So the chances of them doing what I did, watching UFC, that didn't happen, right? So do they know when a new white belt walks into an academy, do they know who Royce Gracie is? Probably not. Do they know who any of these influencers or icons or legends or champions are? It's like, no, I didn't either. So the first thing I did was because I started to learn more about jiu-jitsu, and then you start watching YouTube and you're kind of listening and learning and talking to guys at the gym. You start hearing names, right? And you start listening to podcasts and you're like, oh, wow, there's this whole culture out there, right? So a couple things. I had to go start doing research on who some of these people are. Who is a Marcelo Garcia? Who's a Keenan Cornelius? Who's a John Danaher? And then it's like, okay, there had to be common denominators of success. What did they all do? So I'm also like a Tony Robbins kind of guy. Like Tony Robbins has this quote. It's like, success always leaves clues. There's a popcorn trail that you could model. So if you could identify what it is you want and you know why you want it and you're committed to get there, well, then go find someone else who has already done that. And then learn to model them. Figure out what they did, what they learned, what they do, and you will get there quicker because now you have this model to follow. So that was my mindset of like, okay, there had to be common denominators of success. What did all these influencers and icons and legends do? But I really still couldn't put my finger on it for the longest time. And at first, I think we all think the same thing. I think we all think the fastest way to the top in a lot of endeavors, certainly jiu-jitsu, is we think that memorizing 1,000 things faster than the next guy is the way to become golden, right? So we've been taught to memorize in grade school. Hey, memorize this, take your history test. Memorize this, take your math test. This goes all the way through college. But we also know through science and research, they will give a student a test. They'll memorize stuff. They will give them that exact same test the following week. And where they might have gotten an A, they'll fail the test because a week later, what was it? They just memorized stuff that was meaningless, right?
Been there,
so
yeah.
We've all been indoctrinated into believing what the path to real learning is, or what's important, or how to really learn and master things. So then, of course, I started putting all this into it, and I myself was falling into this trap of we were taught to memorize, and I was thinking if I can memorize 1,000 jiu-jitsu techniques faster than the next guy, I'm golden, right? But then it's much deeper than that. It's like music. The best musicians aren't the ones who memorized the most songs. The best musicians are the ones that can compose and create the best songs based on the mastery of music itself. So that's where my research started to go. And I said, boom, that's it. That's where now I'm onto something. Now I can start going down these rabbit holes. So now this book starts coming together, and it ultimately comes to where it's compelling and captivating stories of icons, influencers, legends, and champions in the jiu-jitsu world. Why? Because that's what was important to me. I want to know how to get good at jiu-jitsu. So what spilled out of all this research and going down all these rabbit holes, 22 scientifically proven principles of success came out the other side. And then I started to notice, oh my gosh, like these 22 scientifically proven principles of success, these are good for on and off mats. These are, it shocked me. They applied to both jiu-jitsu and life. That's when I said, okay, again, like there it is. That's the real goal here. The goal is to have a good and successful life. Now it became like this epiphany of, oh my gosh, we could all have this successful life and a better life through the portal of jiu-jitsu. So jiu-jitsu is going to teach us all of these things. And if we learn how to do jiu-jitsu properly, all of these skills are going to transfer into our other areas of our life, and they go back and forth. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating to me. And that's where I would tell you, the name of the book is Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life. It is a great book if you love jiu-jitsu and you love to learn. So if you're like me, and I love jiu-jitsu, and I love becoming more successful, and I wanted to learn how to achieve breakthrough success and success that is lasting on and off the mats, boom, this book is for you. And that's where, even like with Henry Gracie, he's in a short section of the book. He had a problem. He got injured in jiu-jitsu and he didn't know what he was going to do. And it gets into, and he said, and I picked up on this, he said, there's already people out there with solutions to our problems. We just need to go out and find them. And that gets back to like Tony Robbins. Like, what is it that we want to do? And then how do we go model our success off of them? And that's where I went out and I first said, well, show me who these influencers and legends and champions and icons are in jiu-jitsu, and then let me look for these common denominators of success. So now, with that said, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life is a few dozen stories that are great. They're entertaining, they're fun to read, and that's part of a good book, right? Because we all want a fun book to read. It's not a textbook. It's a fun, entertaining read. But more importantly, these stories on jiu-jitsu allow you, the reader, to pull out and apply these principles of success in your own life, because these principles apply to people of any age or gender. Even if you have kids, like we talked about in jiu-jitsu, read this book together with them and talk about it. The book actually was designed to be read repeatedly. Like for me, it's almost like, oh my gosh, even though I wrote the book and I did all this research and I kind of mastered like what it took to write this book, I want to read this book over and over again as a reminder. It's a guidebook. It's a reference book for myself that brings me back to center, because there's a lot of times I'll start going off the path and thinking like, I need to go, do this or do that, or I'm frustrated with my jiu-jitsu, or I'm frustrated with this. And it's like, no, go back and read that chapter. And I'm like, that's what I needed. I needed that chapter. I needed that principle. So again, the stories are great, fun book to read, but the deeper value is that you learn how to extract out these scientifically proven principles and start implementing them in your own life. And if you want, I'd love to give like 2 awesome examples of so this will give people like a flavor for the book. The first is the story of Kit Dale. Like, are you familiar with Kit Dale, or vaguely familiar with Kit Dale? So there's a lot of people that still, again, a brand new white belt walks into an academy today to sign up for his first class. Does he know who Kit Dale is? And it's like, no, not yet. He may or may not, right? But Kit Dale, what became a fascinating story for me, because I'm hearing all kinds of names, but it's like, what was fascinating about Kit Dale? It's like, okay, a couple things. One, he's very outspoken. So people that know Kit Dale, he's this Australian guy who came from Australian football, got injured, kind of blew out his knee, and then fell into jiu-jitsu. But not only did he fall in love with jiu-jitsu, but his claim to fame was he earned a black belt in 4 years, right? So first things first, like, I'm a professional skeptic, right? Like, I'm the auditor. I'm the guy that doesn't believe a lot of stuff. So at first I'm like, whatever, like, who could really earn a black belt in 4 years? This is baloney. Like, either one, it didn't really happen, or two, the guy got his black belt out of a vending machine, or it's like some hoax, or some goofy black belt gave it to him. It's not legit, right? That's what I was thinking when I heard this story of this guy getting a black belt in, 4 years. So the first thing I wanted to know is this true? Was it a fake black belt? Or did he really earn a black belt in 4 years, or was it fake? Well, get this. As you know, and for people that know Kit Dale, he started competing. So, okay, well, now he's going out and competing. Well, where does he go compete? Is he showing up at these little rinky-dink high school gyms and, you know, dominating over kids or something? It's like, no. Kit Dale starts competing at major events, Abu Dhabi, IBJJFs, you know, World Championship. Like, he's competing against the very high-level caliber, awesome athletes in jiu-jitsu. And guess what? He's winning matches. He's holding his own. He's going toe-to-toe with really big names in jiu-jitsu. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait, this is proof in the pudding. This isn't like some guy that got a fake black belt. This guy was out there competing, showing that it was true, right? He wasn't hiding from it. He's like, no, look, I'm out there. I'm going to go compete. Doesn't win them all, but he wins matches, right, against high-level guys. So I was like, how did he do this? I need to know, how did he do this? Because more importantly, how could I apply these principles in my own journey and my life? So me now, as the researcher, nerd, going down the rabbit hole, I needed to know a lot about Kit Dale. So I start doing all this research on Kit Dale. Like, I want to know, how did this happen? Is this true? It comes out like I start learning. Kit Dale is really into reading all these books and teaching himself different things. And he comes across this information that ultimately stemmed from a book called The Talent Code. It's this book that was written years ago. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was written by Daniel Coyle. The Talent Code is actually a book about neuroscience and deep learning and human learning and this neurological particle called myelin. It's like this brain sheath that helps connect neurons. So this is neuroscience. This is not some, like, I call it woo-woo or frou-frou stuff. It's not about memorization, like passing our history or math test in the third grade. This scientifically proven research is being used and applied in other institutions, the military, businesses, arts, science, sports. So it's like, oh my gosh, what did Kit Dale really do? Did he invent the research? Did he do the research? Did he write the research paper and write, and work? No, he didn't do that. What he did is super important. He cross-pollinized these learning concepts of what these other areas of life have already learned and implemented in the military or institutions or businesses. He now brings this to jiu-jitsu. And guess what happens? Kit Dale applies this to himself and over a short period of time used it to his tremendous advantage. Why? Because what he basically did was he figured out how to cut the learning curve for all intents and purposes in about half the time, right? Because do we normally hear it takes like 5 or 10 to 12 years to become a black belt in jiu-jitsu? And the answer is yes. Like, wouldn't you agree? Like, that's a reasonable time, like 10 to 12 years. Well, then how do you explain someone becoming an elite competitive grappler, getting his black belt in 4, but then really, taking him a couple years to really start applying, even being that black belt talent in competition? It's like, did he not cut the learning curve in half? And it's like, yes, he did. It's like, that totally fascinated me. That told me, going back to the paradox, there is no shortcut, except there is a shortcut. And this guy figured out a principle called deep learning, and he's so adamant about it, and he's very outspoken about it. And now he's designing courses around it, and it holds up to scientific research. And I found that so fascinating that I wanted that information for myself, but I wanted to share this with other people. Like, hey, look, I did this research, and this is all legit. Like, this isn't some fake woo-woo, frou-frou stuff. And I'll put it in the chapter in the book, and I did. Another is someone you're familiar with because he's been a guest on your podcast.
So has Daniel Coyle.
Has he really?
Yeah,
Daniel
way back when, episode 31.
Oh my gosh, I need to go back and listen to that because I thought I've listened to every podcast of BjjBrick, but I guess I missed one.
He's one of the rare guys I could probably tap out that I've interviewed.
And you know what? I would love to, because no joke, like, he did the research. He wrote the book. He's a great author. He shared this research that spread to so many other areas and eventually found its way into jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many white belts that like, here's the other reality. Like, I'm a guy that has read, I have this huge personal library. I read so many books. I love reading. I love researching, right? But if I were to tell a 25-year-old kid, like young adult or anybody, like, hey, all you got to do is read these hundreds of books, it's not going to happen. It's not practical. They don't have time. They don't have the resources. Like, they're not there yet. Like, they need to expedite the key cliff notes, right? On, there really is this book called Talent Code. There really is a guy named Daniel Coyle. He really did do this research. It really is scientifically proven. And here's proof that it infiltrated the jiu-jitsu world. Here's proof, right? Like,
yeah,
that's important.
And what it also did is, a little before that time, there was the Anders Ericsson, the 10,000 hour rules, and Malcolm Gladwell made that really popular. And people were just wanting to get 10,000 hours of training, and then they would be amazing at jiu-jitsu. But they would, want to do 10,000 reps of arm bars or 10,000 takedowns. And sure, that's great. But if you do them a little bit more intelligently, or work them in a better way. Example today, I was rolling with somebody. He went from side control to mount, and he handed me his leg. Like, okay, you put yourself in half guard, man. I said, stop.
Right.
I stopped. Go back to side control. Do it again, but don't give me your leg. And that's probably worth 50 reps of him trying to go to mount. Just, okay, I did do that wrong. So, and then he changed it in real time, and he did it better. And so the idea that you need to train for 10,000 hours was kind of turned on its head by Daniel Coyle. And sure, that's one way to do it, but there are other ways in deep practice and deep learning and new training methods and that sort of thing are just accelerating our learning process.
Correct. So now another fascinating example, and this is one you will relate to because he's been a guest on your podcast, Espen Mathisen, right? Sure, yeah. So Espen, huge fascinating story. One, go back and listen to the podcast episode on BJJBrick, but then learn, there's so much to learn from Espen's story. So another guy would go down that rabbit hole, go do the research. So for people unfamiliar, here's the quick summary on Espen. He was born and raised in a tiny coastal fishing village in Norway. Now, at 14, he finally gets exposed to some jiu-jitsu through a medical doctor who is a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. This blue belt medical doctor was willing to teach anybody and everybody some jiu-jitsu moves. Why? Because he wanted some people to practice with and train with. So he kind of was like, hey, I'll teach you some stuff. But what did he really want? He wanted some people to practice with and training partners. So somehow Espen meets this blue belt medical doctor. You got to remember, one, Espen is 14 years old. This is not Rio de Janeiro. This is not Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is not Southern California. This is not New York City with John Danaher, Nicky Ryan walking in, Gordon Ryan's little brother, like, oh, I'm Nicky Ryan. I'm 13 years old. Let me just jump into John Danaher's death squad and learn super fast, right? This is a kid who had, for all intents and purposes, no jiu-jitsu anywhere around him. But what happens? He falls in love with jiu-jitsu, like all of us, right? We become addicted to jiu-jitsu. So here's this young boy who's just a teenager. He's in love with jiu-jitsu, but guess what happens? The medical doctor moves away. He moves to another city. Well, now that leaves Espen in a little bit of a crisis. Like, well, what happens to my jiu-jitsu? Like, I love jiu-jitsu. I've got one buddy, but now there's no training academies. There's no instructors. There's none of this infrastructure. There's nobody even in the community that even knows what jiu-jitsu is. It's just some weird thing that this kid wants to do. So what does Espen do? He starts reading, and this is the funniest part. One, I'm amazed that kids actually read books. That pleases me, right? This kid in Norway starts reading books, but the books don't make any sense when you listen to a teenager. He's reading books by Joe Dispenza, which, for people unfamiliar, Joe Dispenza is this doctor, chiropractor that is into neuroscience. He's writing these books called You Are the Placebo,
Yeah, that's right.
Evolve Your Brain. Like, these are heavy, like, transform yourself through neuroscience, and they're very heavy, hard to read. You're not reading Harry Potter books, right? You're reading like these things that are like god awful to get through. But these are Joe Dispenza books. This kid in Norway as a teenager is reading these types of books. I find that, one, off the wall. But then two, he comes across this book called Make It Stick, The Science of Learning by Peter Brown and Henry Rodinger. So this kid in Norway, he's a kid. He's reading books. He has to figure out his way. And now he starts devising his own grandmaster plan on how he's going to become this high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner when it's ridiculous, right? Like, there's nothing there to show that this kid is going to end up having any success. That's not the way Espen looked at it. He looked at it as like, well, that's what you may believe, but I already read these Joe Dispenza books. Joe is telling me I could program my brain to be whatever I want. I'm my own placebo. I could evolve my brain. So I'm just going to program myself to become an elite jiu-jitsu practitioner, right? Like, you almost need that whole sequence of events to set the stage for Espen's story. And that's what happens. So what Espen's story is so valuable and so fascinating for all of us is how many of us feel as though our jiu-jitsu is being restricted or impacted or slowed down because we aren't at Atos, or we aren't at Henzo Gracie with John Danaher in New York City, or some school, or we don't have some world-class facility with awesome mats, or with world-class training partners, or world champion instructors, or super laid out curriculums. Did Espen have any of those? No, because you know his story, right? He's a fascinating story. He didn't have that. So now Espen creates his own grandmaster plan. Now he has to convince his parents as a late teenager that on school breaks, he's going to go travel to the United States. He ends up, doing a little bit of training with Gustavo Dantas in Arizona, making his way over to the Mendes brothers. He finds his way for little bits down in Brazil, but he needs to figure out how to create his own grandmaster plan. And the kid does it. And that's the whole fascinating thing. He was just a kid, but he figured it out. He worked his way up. Well, now he's in his early 20s. Yeah, he's a high-level black belt. But along the way, this is a kid that started medaling at Euros and Pans and IBJJFs. This wasn't like some fictional, I kind of learned some jiu-jitsu moves in my garage. No, he really did get mats, and he really did practice with his buddy in this small little Norwegian coastal village until finally he got to a point where he could then relocate as a young adult and then started training with like Johnny Langaker, and some more elite guys to really hone his game. But that was later, right? He started as a 14-year-old with no shot. But did that stop him from learning and teaching himself? No. So that is another example of, he read this book, Make It Stick, The Science of Learning. He realized there is a science to learning. Now all he had to do is figure out how to apply that to jiu-jitsu. The fact is, as you know, Espen is a very smart kid. He could apply these principles of what he learned, and my guess is Espen would be successful in anything that he applied himself to, because now he taught himself how to learn, right? He taught himself how to learn at a very expedited pace. So I'm convinced if Espen did follow probably his parents' advice and go on to, science and engineering school in Norway, and he had an opportunity to go on to, college and get these advanced degrees.
Yeah.
But he passed all that up for what? Jiu-jitsu. So he chose to apply it to jiu-jitsu, but there's morals of the story in this, and that became so critical. For another example, this is in that book, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life. It's not a book about jiu-jitsu techniques, nor is it a book about memorizing things like 1,000 techniques. Science has overwhelmingly proven that this is not the most effective path to true mastery. Going back to, a great musician is not the person who has memorized 1,000 songs. So going back to maybe like a Kit Dale example, which I think really nails it. Kit Dale says about like memorizing a dance routine to a certain song. It's all great, and you look like you really are a good dancer with some hot moves right up until they switch the music. Then people realize, and you realize, you really can't dance. You only memorized a set of moves to match one song. And once that song changed, you really didn't know how to dance. So what you really want to do is learn how to dance. In our case, what we really want to learn is how to do jiu-jitsu in a real environment that always has changing situations. It's music improvisation that led to mastery. And that's why with us as jiu-jitsu practitioners, that's what we're really learning. And that's why like in music, they have practice and theory. You learn the theory of music to then practice it, to then master music. So Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life is a book that will change your outlook on learning jiu-jitsu and life, and will give you a path to transform yourself. Again, it's cool to read and learn about the success of others and the jiu-jitsu community, including business and life. I mean, there's really some cool stories of people that are, successful in business even because of jiu-jitsu. But what matters is if you can transform yourself or achieve breakthrough success, then you really added value to yourself. So what my goal was with this book, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life, is help you transform yourself better, faster, stronger, quicker, cut out all the stuff that doesn't matter, focus on all these principles that really do matter, and then guess what is probably going to happen if you could apply this in your own life? Your whole life is going to get better. Why? Because you're going to be better in all facets of your life. Yeah, your jiu-jitsu game is going to do a lot better, but your relationships are going to get better. You'll probably be better with your money. You'll probably be better with your career. You're going to be better if you even decide one day to practice the guitar. You'll be like, I know how to learn better, right? Because I just learned these things. So that really was the whole gist of how this book started, evolved, came together, and then I'm so pleased at the way it finally did come together, because I believe it's a really excellent resource that could be referred to consistently and used by other practitioners.
Yeah.
Based on scientific research. It's not frou-frou. It's not, woo-woo. No, this is legit stuff that has been proven and used in other areas and now could be applied to what we love, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. You give lots of examples and have lots of stories in here that really help illustrate what's going on. And I think all these principles in here, I think we could all learn about them, without the lens of jiu-jitsu, but it's the benefit of it is that if you train jiu-jitsu, you get a guy explaining the principles that's talking your language. That's, okay, I know who this person is. Yes, okay, Kit Dale did this. And that makes sense to me because I understand how hard it is to train and how hard it is to get better at something. And he's learning better. Okay, I can learn better. I just think that these lessons are easier to learn when the instructor is properly aimed at the student. And if you train jiu-jitsu and you're interested in jiu-jitsu, that's really who you're aimed at here. People who are interested in jiu-jitsu. So all these lessons are just like everybody can have something in their mind of what you've learned at jiu-jitsu and how it's helped you off the mat. I would hope so. And after training for even a few months, you've learned something about the type of person you are, or how to treat people, or anything like that. And you've taken that out. And here are a bunch of great examples of these lessons and these principles of a wide range of people's lives, and how that these principles have positively affected their life and how they're doing things. I think one example would be, I think for kids, is they see how hard work actually pays off and helps them get better at something. As a kid, I think you mentioned school was tough. School was tough for me too. I didn't like studying. My thing as a kid, I went to school. I didn't skip school. I had good attendance. I didn't pay attention. Right. I would zone out and draw stuff all day long, and wasn't the best student, in grade school.
Yeah,
but hard
I think people
work.
could relate
I think
to that.
As jiu-jitsu has gone, I come in and I want to. If I work hard for a week or a month on one or two things, I actually get better at those.
That's
and
right.
if I was a kid and I saw that, you know what? If I actually apply myself, I'll get better grades. I'll learn more. And I didn't learn that as a kid, but I think that's one benefit that kids get out of it is they see, I'm getting better. They develop that growth mindset.
Yes, it's that growth mindset. Momentum and consistency and discipline and how to have processes and adapt and simplify things. And there's just all these principles proven that we now can model off of other people and apply to our own life. So now, we want to apply them to jiu-jitsu. But as you know, if you applied those principles to other areas of life, you'd probably start to have some breakthrough performance if you continue to practice those principles. So that's, I think, as you coming in contact with white belts. The other thing is, again, here's where it's really hard for academy owners, and I feel their pain. They're trying to run businesses. They have a passion business. They're not doing it for the money. A lot of schools, they're not getting rich off running a jiu-jitsu school. Some are doing very, very well, don't get me wrong. But you have these new students that are always coming on. It's not like college where all the students start on the same day in September after Labor Day, right? Or it's not like high school where everybody goes back to school and starts the 9th grade on the same day. And 9th grade math, which might be, algebra, they're all going to start at the same place at the same time and go through the same chapters at the same pace, right? That's not how jiu-jitsu is right now in jiu-jitsu's evolvement.
Yeah, your day one of jiu-jitsu is a lot different than the guys next to you day one. And it's probably somebody else's year 5.
Right, because
and you're all in the same class.
Yeah, you're all in the same class. You're on day 1, chapter 1, page 1. And someone else is on chapter 5, halfway through the chapter, and skipped chapter 4, but already did chapter 10. And that, now how do you handle that as an instructor where, the truth is, even as a white belt, it gets back to that. That's where I really tried my hardest. I didn't want to write a history book, right? Because one, that's already been done. And two, I don't think that was really the value add here with a book on jiu-jitsu. But the history still and the stories are important because there is something to learn from who these legends are, who paved the way, who were the champions. Is there not value in knowing, as a white belt, right now you walk into the school, I really want you to be able to say, hey, you know what, this book, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life, this is really cool because it really cleared up a lot of confusion because a lot of my classmates at jiu-jitsu, they're talking about all these names and I don't know who these people are, but I'm afraid to ask. Like, I don't know who John Danaher is, or I don't know who Marcelo Garcia is, or I don't know who Keenan Cornelius is, or I don't know who Henner Gracie is, or any of these people, right? Because we forget when you walk into the academy, you don't even know how to tie your belt. You sometimes put your gi pants on backwards and can't figure out why they're not tightening on you, right? Because that's the truth, right? Like, you see this. So we have to remind ourselves when that new person comes into the academy, they don't know, they're insecure, they're afraid to look foolish, they want to succeed, they want to get caught up to speed, and they don't know how. And the academy owner or even the instructor can't keep going through one-on-one, I'm going to get you totally caught up, because 20 people in class, or the school has 100 students, or 200 students, or 300 students, or 500 students, right? So that's also where I thought there was value. There was a lot of things that subconsciously I tried to put in this book of really good stories of important icons and influencers that it really doesn't matter if you're a black belt, a purple belt, a white belt. Hopefully you're going to get something out of this book. But boy, would this book have been awesome. I would have loved this book when I was a white belt, right? I really would have, because it would have just like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing. This just got me totally up to speed. I read this book, and now I kind of feel like I could have conversations with some of the other guys at the gym and not look like an idiot, because I know it's kind of, I know some of the backstory, right? So,
and as a teaching tool for kids, I don't know what grade level of reading is required here, but if a kid is really interested in jiu-jitsu, this book is a great read, because like they'll get through it because it's jiu-jitsu, and they'll learn a lot about off the mat stuff, which is a great way to kind of sneak in some lessons to a kid who just wants to learn about jiu-jitsu and the people and the things that go on the mats.
Yes, and that's where I would add, like, if you're a parent of a kid with jiu-jitsu and you're looking for stocking stuffers, right? It's like we're coming up on the holidays, or your kid did a good deed and you want to get them something, but you don't want to spend $100. It's like, this is a great thing. Like, seriously, get your kid Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life. Or if you're an academy owner and you want to make a really good impression on the parents of a student, you know, because I know a lot of academy owners, they're looking for things to add value. And a lot of times they're like, oh, we'll give you a kid a free gi, or we'll do this for your kid, or we'll do that for the kid. Or we're trying to prove that we're trying to teach your kid more than just how to rear naked choke someone, because that's kind of weird for some parents, right? Like, okay, I want my kid to build self-confidence. I want my kid to, you know, learn some different things and participate in jiu-jitsu, but it's kind of weird. Like, my kid is really starting to like learn how to choke out other kids or something. Right? Like, so what? Like, why do parents even want their children in martial arts programs? And it's to learn martial arts, the spirit of martial arts, the values of martial arts, the principles of martial arts, and that's where even this book, it applies to so many situations, right? So again, whether you're 25, 35, 55, like it's just a cool resource with great stories that's fun, and there's just hopefully a lot of value add for everybody to come away with something and be like, that was cool. Like, that was a cool way. Like, the book, because I've even some people are telling me, like, I really can't describe your book. Like, it's a little. I kind of took it as this: is it like it's got some history in it, or it's got this in it, or it's got some science in it, or like it's just a different book. And it's like, yeah, it is. It's a different book. It's a fun, entertaining read with stories, but it's so much deeper on that. And that's why I love people saying, I love this quote, or I love this chapter. I went back and I reread it, and it really helped me get through, you know, this little thing I'm kind of hung up on in my life or jiu-jitsu. It's like, that's super satisfying, right? As an author or content creator. Yeah.
Where's the best place to go to find the book?
Amazon is probably the best, because it doesn't matter where you live and anywhere around the world. Go to Amazon.com. It's called Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life by Paul Kindzia. You could find me. I have a website up, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life. I even say there's a free chapter on the website. So if you go to www.Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life, I put up chapter 5 on one of the principles. It's a great story. It's got Jean-Jacques Machado, Dean Lister, Jocko Willink. Go and get some for free. Try it out. So if you even want to get a taste of the book, go download a free chapter. I'll let you download a free chapter. So that's on the website. You can follow me on social media, Instagram and Facebook, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life. All one jumbled word, Master Jiu-Jitsu Master Life. So I'm out there on Instagram. I'm out there on Facebook. If you show up to IBJJFs, especially along the East Coast, you'll see me a lot at competition. Come up and say hi. I love competing. I love going out there, supporting, coaching, videoing, just being around the environment. So if you see me out there, come up and say hi.
Awesome. And I'll put links to all that stuff, make it easy, but it shouldn't be hard to find your book. And I definitely recommend it. I've read the whole thing, and that's why a little delay getting you on here, because I wanted to read it. But I learned a lot, and I'm happy to share it with everybody listening today.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for hopping on here with me.
I appreciate you having me. I appreciate everything you do. I really do. I think you were a positive influence on my jiu-jitsu and my life journey. I appreciate, because I know even as podcasters starting out, you didn't do it for the money.
Haven't done it for the money yet.
Yeah, you haven't done it for the money, but that doesn't mean you're not making an impact, because it's the trickle effect, right? You influenced me. You changed my life. I ended up doing something that will change someone else's life. So you're like paying it forward. And that's why I'm so grateful for people like yourself, that it didn't matter that you were in Wichita and I was in Atlanta. You changed my life through your efforts and your unselfish behaviors of sharing. And I am just so grateful for people like yourself and Joe and, all the rest of the crew at BJJBrick. It's great what you're doing, and I really support everything you're doing, and hope you keep it up, because I love it.
Thank you. We have no plans to change, like you said earlier, though, things happen, you're planning on being a triathlete, you're in it full bore, and things happen, but no plans to change. We're enjoying the process, and hearing positive words like that, Paul, always helps us.
And I am going to get to Wichita. Hopefully you do another event like you did. It just turned out I was already signed up for nationals when you were doing your big event in Wichita, but I am going to make my way some way, somehow, to get out there to Wichita and get on the mats and have some fun and roll. And I love meeting people. So one day, Byron and Paul Kindzia are going to bump hands and hopefully at level 5, where I'm going to be like, Byron, don't you remember what I said on your podcast? I like rolling like at level 5, 6, 7 and doing technical rolls. It's not 11 for me.
That's
unless
funny.
It's the BJJF, then it's 11. So
that's absolutely. We're hoping to do another event in the summertime, but you're welcome anytime, and really anybody is. If you're able to come anytime, I'd be happy to train with you. So, yeah, welcome.
Awesome.
Thank you, Paul.
Have a great one. Thank you so much, guys.
Man, I want to thank Paul for getting on here and sharing some of his book with us and a lot about his life. And really, I read the book cover to cover, really enjoyed it, and I was happy to get Paul, who is also a listener of the podcast, and he's actually also a Patreon supporter for quite some time of the podcast, and it's an honor to get him on here and talk about jiu-jitsu with him. So thank you, Paul, so much.
Yep. And if you're listening to the show, it's probably because you like jiu-jitsu. I'm guessing you have other friends that like jiu-jitsu as well. So tell a friend about the show, share an episode with them, and we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, it means a lot to us when either you send us an email, hey, I told my friends about it, or like, hey, I just found your show, somebody recommended it. That's great. I know a lot of people kind of stumble upon us just by searching for podcasts related to jiu-jitsu, but when you get the recommendation from a friend, or a coach recommends it, or you recommend it to your coach, man, that just means the world to us that you give that kind of recommendation. This week for the article, man, this website has been cranking out some great articles, Joe. BjjBrick.com, which by no coincidence is the BJJ Podcast. It's the home of our podcast. we do like to write articles. Joe has really taken the lead in article writing, and I really appreciate it, Joe. You do a very good job of getting your ideas down and sharing them in article format, and also in the audio format as well. So definitely happy to bring this article for Article Week. The best defense is a good offense. I don't know how you want me to read that. Maybe I read it wrong. I added a little bit of a question at the offense part. But Joe, tell us a little bit about this article, my friend.
Yeah, so that was, I guess, the way that you introduced that was kind of the genesis for the writing of the article, because I think anybody that's played sports, they've heard that. I think especially in football, it's kind of embraced. If you're putting points up on the board every time you got the ball, then you don't have to worry about its defense as much. You just outscore the other team. And so I'm thinking, is this true in jiu-jitsu? And I think in certain contexts it is, and at least in one context it's not. So I know you teach some classes, Byron. Tell me if you agree with me. I think when you're on top position, it's very true. If you're in a dominant position, that if you don't give your opponent time to set up his frames and get his grips and come up with a game plan, if you keep him busy defending, you're chasing his neck, you're chasing a Kimura, you're threatening to advance position. I think it's definitely true then. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, you've got to keep him trying to prevent you from tapping him out. That way your opponent is not trying to actually escape. If you could do it right, that's a great way to play the game.
Yep. So I think that's one context where it's definitely true. I think another context where it may not always be true but is applicable is in scrambles and in transitions. A lot of times, when you're passing somebody's guard, they're also trying to sweep you, and sometimes it's a chaotic situation. And certainly your main goal is to improve your position. And if you're on top, stay on top. If you're on bottom, to get on top. But while you're doing that, if you're looking for opportunities to attack, there's oftentimes a lot of opportunities that present themselves then. Your opponent stiff arms you, or, and exposes an arm or a neck or something like that. So I definitely think finishing the pass should be your first priority if you're passing the guard or finishing the sweep. But, man, if you're looking for submissions, they might be there. And if you're just trying to come out in the best position possible, so your opponent's doing a double leg and he's taking you down, certainly you want to end up in a guard as opposed to bottom side control. But if you end up in a guard with a guillotine already wrapped up or a Kimura grip already locked up, then it's even better. So I would say in transitions, you should also be looking for offense.
Yeah, but also in that same respect, be careful, because certain games and people tend to do better in those transition or those scrambles. And if you have, I'm trying to think of I don't know, let's just say spider guard. If your game is needs to get the spider guard for you to have success, you might not have the most offensive route through a scramble. You just want to somehow get to your guard where you could then set it up. I'm a guillotine guy. I don't have the best ability to scramble at all, but I do like scrambling, because a lot of times during a scramble or during a little bit of a fight for position, guillotines show up. It's not a technique I need to have a lot of setup with. They just kind of show up sometimes when somebody's either moving forward too much or has their head up a bit, in the wrong place. And I think it can kind of depend on the techniques you favor, whether you should kind of be, and also it depends on who you're training with or who you're rolling with. If you tend to end up in scrambles and in a terrible spot when it's over, try to lock in some defense to at least get your guard. If you're always winning scrambles and you just end up in top or get side control, try to be maybe a little more patient with that and try to get something get a really good side control where maybe they're turned away from you, or you're almost setting an armbar up already, or you get a submission off of the scramble. Just try to take it one step further in the correct direction. Whether that's defensively or offensively, I think that would be another way to look at that. And that just depends on your style, and it also depends on the other person who you're training with. Yep,
absolutely. And keep in mind, your opponent or your training partner, they're doing the same thing. So sometimes you might think you see an opportunity to attack, and it might be a trap. So
yeah. If every time Joe and I scramble, I end up on my butt or on my back, okay, I know I'm not going to win the top fight with Joe, but I definitely don't want to end up with him on side control in this thing. So I need to at least get to where I'm not going to, get my guard passed or end up in a real bad spot before I feel like I'm comfortable to attack. And then it may not be one thing or the other, but I'm not going to do something that would leave me wide open while I'm trying to do an attack.
Absolutely. And then the last point I made in the article, and this is geared mostly towards beginners, but just a cautionary note that there are definitely some positions and situations in jiu-jitsu that trying to attack is probably the last thing you need to be doing. I know there's a few guys that have success setting like a baseball bat choke up from bottom side control or something. But generally, if you're stuck at bottom side or if you're stuck in bottom mount, your goal should be to protect your neck, protect your arms, and incrementally improve your position. You know, a classic example of guys making mistakes is new guys that come in and they're inside somebody's closed guard and they're trying to choke, you know, with the gi collar or something, and you're just setting yourself up for an arm bar there. So just be aware that there are times in jiu-jitsu where defense and positional improvement should be your only goals. Did you ever have trouble with that, Joe, where you were not really trying to get into a good place to attack, and like maybe early on in your game you were attacking from bad positions? Yeah, you know, it's I'm sure I tried to Americana somebody from inside their guard at some point, or know. But that does remind me of one of my earliest memories in jiu-jitsu. Before I got serious and was training this go around, I did do it for about a year in my 30s before we moved. And I remember I was maybe a month or 2 months in, and we just trained from the feet back then, and just everything was takedowns. And so I was going against this. I think he was a new blue belt and also a high school wrestler. And I just dove in for a double leg, and it's like things went in slow motion. I had enough time to think, oh my God, I can't believe I'm taking this guy down. This is so awesome. And I mean, by the time we hit the deck, that guillotine was so tight I couldn't tap fast enough. So, yeah, just kind of when you're new, you just have a lack of awareness. And I think that's one of the things you have to develop, is that awareness and knowing when to be on offense and when to be on defense. Yeah. I think a common one that people find is, and it's not necessarily that they're on too much offense, it's like maybe the wrong kind of offense. If Joe's trying to pass my guard, okay, he's working, and let's just say he's also working his leg attacks. And instead of actually trying to pass my guard, he's going for ankle locks and different attacks on my feet. I think unless you've already learned a couple of good guard passes you're comfortable with, you're probably doing the wrong thing. Not that they won't get you taps, but it's important to learn how to pass somebody's guard. That's a key to what we're doing here, versus learning how to do a single submission or even a chain of submissions. Learning how to do a guard pass is one of the most important things we could do in jiu-jitsu. Learning how to attack somebody's foot is very important, but it's one aspect of a type of submission. It's like not knowing how to escape. You know, like I may not know how to escape an ankle lock, but I'd rather know how to escape side control or mount or back versus one type of a submission in particular. So I think that's when teachers say you're too new to learn footlocks, part of that they say is for safety, and that's fine. But also part of that is, if you haven't got a good couple of guard passes involved, they don't want you going back for leg locks and not developing your guard passing game first. And I think that is important, because trust me, you know, as Joe's working to attack my feet, if he's got a good guard pass that he could threaten me with, and sometimes I get it, I'm going to be a lot more careful of that, and which makes his ankle attacks or his foot locks much more surprising and much more strong when he can back those up with a good guard pass at the same time. And I've gotten out of defend two things instead of kind of a almost guard pass where I don't really feel threatened, trying to defend a footlock I should know which is around the corner, to where I got to defend the guard pass seriously, which might put me in more jeopardy for the leg attack. Not that the top player isn't on offense, but they're doing something that's the wrong thing. Your primary goal should be to pass guard. And sure, it's fine to pick up a phase and primary goal of attack the foot from the top position, but you should have a good guard pass at that time. Yep, absolutely. Anyway, it was a fun article to write. Go to the website and check it out if you're interested. And check out, there's other articles there. Byron's written some. We got, after 5 years, got Gary to write one, and it was absolutely fabulous, actually. So he did we're going to try and talk. Yeah, we're going to try and talk him into write a few more when he gets time. So anyway, check it out. It's the BjjBrick.com, BjjBrickPodcast.com.
No, I don't have that. I probably should get that, but it doesn't really matter. Just BjjBrick.com.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to get the BjjBrickPodcast.com, don't be too mean to us on there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to buy all the domain names that might come about from this. The good thing is with jiu-jitsu, it's a pretty small community. And it doesn't take much to know somebody who knows somebody else. So, like that also works online. I don't feel like anyone's going to take the BjjBrickPodcast.com and trash us with it, because literally, I would almost bet my coach either knows somebody that knows their coach or just knows their coach. Like, it's that small of a community. And also, they're just a phone call away to what's going on, man. And really, I don't think that would really hurt us that bad anyway. So, unless it's just attacking Gary. In fact, I might just do that right now. Get the domain name BjjBrick.podcast.com and just make it a Trash Gary style of page.
It'll blow up. It'll be the most popular jiu-jitsu site out there.
Oh, man. The opportunities are really out there when Gary's gone. I want to thank some of our Patreon supporters this week, Gudrun, Mislav, and Craig. Thank you guys so much for supporting us on Patreon. It really means a lot to us that you're giving your continued support to the podcast and helping us grow and make the show what it's become today. If you want to help us out and support us on Patreon, it means the world to us. What most people have done is they go on there, they say, I want to pledge $1 per episode. Some people even pledge up to $3 per episode. And that money goes to support the show. No matter what you pledge, $1 to $3, or even more if you're really crazy, we'll send you out a BJJBrick gi patch. It's 5 inches across. And we'll also mail you out a BJJBrick sticker. All of our Patreon supporters are welcome to join our private Facebook group. In order to join that, send me a link to your Facebook page at bjjbrick@gmail.com, and I'll get you added to the group, and we discuss kind of behind-the-scenes podcast stuff on there, and we would love to have you join that group if you're up for it. But it's just that simple. There's a link in the show notes about Patreon. Go check it out if you're interested in helping us out. We appreciate it.
Yeah, roger that. Patreon support is really helpful. I appreciate them. Guys, check us out on social media. Stop by our YouTube channel. Byron's got some interesting things on there, a couple of product reviews. Actually, he recorded a whole episode of the BJJ Podcast with Brian Freeman a while ago. That's on there if you want to dig through that and check it out too. We got a BJJ app you might want to download. I get every episode as soon as it comes out. We're on Facebook as well, so check us out there and like and comment.
Like and comment. Yep, we do. Man, we love it when you guys are commenting and supporting our post on typically Facebook is where we see most things. Oh, there's also a apps. We're talking about apps. Maroon is the name of a jiu-jitsu training log app. It's spelled Marune. And if you want to kind of keep track of your training and what you've trained and when and where, that sort of thing, it's a tremendous app to do it. There's also a fun kind of a social media aspect to it on there. And, man, it's cool to see your guys' training sessions come in, and a lot of you guys post pictures. That's fun to see. I try to do that as well. Find me on there. Type in BJJBrick. Joe, I think your profile is like BJJBrick Joe or something like that. Find us both, add us. It makes it more fun to have you guys on there, commenting on our things, and we like to look at your guys's and give you a good thumbs up or us as we see your progress.
Yep, it's definitely cool. And if you're not into the big social aspect of it and commenting and liking everybody else's training sessions, that's fine. It's still very useful. I just picked up my phone. I'm looking at mine, and I didn't start recording sessions until late in the month. But I could look at it here and see that I trained cross choke from the guard, trained deep half one class, back attacks, straight ankle locks. I did that twice, actually. So, just the few sessions that I logged, I can actually look back and remember what I trained and review that. It gives you an average for the month. Lots of helpful stuff there. So if you don't have it, check it out and see if it's something you're interested in.
Yeah, real cool. And like it lets you know I'm just looking at mine. Joe and I are recording this the day after Thanksgiving, so that shows you some dedication on Joe. Man, I appreciate you helping on here at a time like this. But so far this month, I've rolled 6.75 hours. That's not a lot, but it's not terrible either. Last week was a bit hard for me with work schedule, and this week with the holidays. So, but it kind of keeps track of that, and you can compare it to last month and different things, and just see how you're doing and try to increase or maintain or all that sort of thing is I think it's smart, and I think it's motivational as well. So I just like to mention that because it's such it's free. It's just such a interesting way to log your training that I've been looking for quite some time. So recommend it, and then find me and Joe on there. Man, that's so much fun.
Absolutely.
Joe, we are thrilled to be. I'm actually making a audiobook. I'm working hard on it, guys. I'm trying to juggle a lot of different things. I'm trying to change the introduction to the show. The main idea with that, like our show intro, I like it, but it's kind of advertising our show. It's saying, which is a good thing. It's like, what we're here, what we're going to do, and how we're going to do it, and that sort of thing. And I think I want to change the intro to be more like why jiu-jitsu is so great, and really push that like a little differently. And I kind of want it to be community driven. And we've got some of our Patreon supporters that are going to appear in the new intro. So I'm trying to get that done. I'm also trying to make another audiobook. The book is The Art of War for Jiu-Jitsu. So I'm really studying deep into the art of war and the principles taught by Sun Tzu and all these lessons that you can get from that, and then to bring them into the jiu-jitsu world. So I'm really in the point where I'm studying that, and I'm getting lessons down, and I'm recording audio content and getting everything all put together. It's a lot of work. Didn't anticipate how much work it is going to be. Working on that as well. But Joe, behind the scenes, has worked very minimally to construct this amazing audiobook. And it basically comes down, he's got a lot of experience with jiu-jitsu. He's got some experience with the guitar, and he's really been a fan at one point in time of like the wrestling style, WWE style of wrestling, where you hit somebody with a guitar. And so grappling with a guitar and coming off the top ropes, a lot of tips, a lot of advice about using a guitar while you grapple. Sometimes I think there might even be footage out there of Joe coaching somebody from the side and then coming in with that guitar and smacking the opponent while the referee was distracted. He's got a lot going on there, but it's kind of an interesting audiobook. I'm just really impressed by the amount of knowledge and experience he's had while grappling with a guitar.
Okay, well, first of all, I've only been working on the book minimally, but a little bit at a time. For the listeners that are our age,
2 minutes ago.
Yeah, but for the listeners that are our age, you might remember Quick Draw McGraw from Saturday morning cartoons in El Kabong. And it was a horse character that rode around and bonged people on the head with his, it looks like a 4-string, must have been a ukulele. So that's my my inspiration for the book. I carry a large gym bag with a small guitar in it all the time. It's bailed me out numerous times. And one thing that people don't really realize is the tightest choke you can put on somebody is with a guitar string, sort of like the old piano wire, but with a guitar string. So that's my secret weapon, Byron.
So, Quick Draw McGraw, I just Googled it. It's familiar. I don't know if I've really seen it and maybe just forgot it or what, but he's a horse. He's wearing a handkerchief and like a gun belt with a little pistol on his side, and a lot of times he has a cape and a guitar in his hand. But I do notice Joe's grappling
like Zorro.
Yeah,
I mean, what's not to like about the guy?
What a great character. I also noticed really the lack of pants. So Joe, what style you have, my friend?
Well, I find it's best to attack from the back, so that's my motto. You notice if you look through the pictures here from Quick Draw McGraw, you notice he had a trusty sidekick, and
is that a donkey or what?
Yeah, it's a little donkey. So if you're listening to the show and you're thinking this audiobook isn't all that some of them are, it's because my trusty sidekick Gary's not here to help me. Yeah, I am Quick Draw McGraw, and he's the little ass.
Which is the first time
Gary's
ever been referred to as that.
So go to our website, look for the book, and look for the merchandise. We'll have Quick Draw McGraw and his little donkey sidekick figurines for sale. So we're looking forward to profit off this one. Wow.
So I'm just reading the Wikipedia on Quick Draw McGraw. 1959 to 1962 is when it was written.
Okay. So a little before not much before my time, but yeah, I guess I was watching reruns when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too as well. But you can watch the reruns still on YouTube, so it's all good.
Yep.
Oh, Gary.
All right, so that's it, guys. Check it out.
Good times, our friends. We'll catch you guys next week. Stay sweaty, my friends.
Don't forget to shower. we're short-handed here, but don't forget to shower and train smart and train hard and get better, guys. We'll see you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you find the time today to roll. After all, the best way to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.